Awesome. We're going to do just brief introductions, then go over the agenda and get started. So like I mentioned, my name is Melina. I am currently a co-VP of community along with Govinda at YPE SF Bay Area. I launched the scholarship this year, which is this event is part of kind of the scholarship offering. And then outside of YPE, I'm a sales analyst at Nextracker, focusing on utility scale solar project sales. Govinda, do you want to introduce yourself real quick?
Yeah, thank you. Hi, everyone. Thank you all for joining. I'm currently serving as a board member at YPES Bay Area 2, and I'm working at PG&E in the Distributed Energy Resources team. Thank you.
Pat.
Hey, everyone. I am a member of the events committee at YPE Bay Area. I'll be running the project and corporate finance session today. I am currently a first-year MBA student at Stanford's Graduate School of Business, but previously worked in the Bay Area in infrastructure investing and project finance.
And then Igor, do you want to introduce yourself? Igor's also the workshop lead for the policy and regulations, but he's also helped plan this event.
Hi, everyone. Igor Tregub. I will be facilitating your first workshop on policy and regulations, but I'm also the VP of Communications for YPE SF Bay Area. Look forward to working with you.
Awesome. And then we're just going to go over the agenda real quick. So the policy and regulations workshop will be up next. We'll be starting in the next few minutes. That will run till approximately 11 a.m. Pacific time. And then at 11 to 12, we'll have the project and corporate finance. We scheduled a 30-hour lunch break starting at 12, but in case the project and corporate finance workshop runs a little late, we may take up some of that time. So just giving you a heads up, you're welcome to stay past the 12 o'clock hour, but you definitely don't have to since we scheduled that as a lunch break. And then at 12:30, we'll have the last workshop, which is project and business development. And then at 1:30 to 1:45, we'll have the audience Q&A and closing comments. So we're excited to have you guys on board. And with that, let's kick off the policy and regulations workshop. Igor, let me make you spotlight.
Welcome, everyone. It's great to see you all on this fine Saturday morning. Thank you so much for joining. And so in my day job for the last 7 months, I have been working at the California Solar and Storage Association, and I'll tell you a little bit more about it in a moment, but just to very quick kind of points. We serve over 700, mostly small businesses in the distributed generation space. So that's everything that's not utility scale based for solar and storage. So everything that's behind the meter is what CALSA works on. We are the largest renewable energy trade association in California, and cumulatively the businesses we represent are 40% collectively of the of California's clean energy space. And yeah, Melina, whenever you can put together those breakout groups, but don't send folks to them just yet. So we have some exciting things for you in store. First, I have a couple of presentations that I wanted to share with you. So in full transparency, none of these presentations are going to be mine because the folks that I work with have done such a good job of presenting things. So I'm going to share, oh, looks like I can't screen share, but if, Melina, if you can.
Let me make you a host real quick.
Thanks.
And that will fix the problem.
Right.
Let me see.
I think I can share now.
Awesome.
So I wanted to just provide a little bit of information about policy and regulation. This slide deck is from Walker White, who is has a very senior role with Sunrun, one of our member organizations. We work with them very closely. And I thought this is a really nice framing of when we do policy advocacy or policy in general, always trying to understand who are the stakeholders and why. And these stakeholders include pretty much everyone in the space. They can include regulators like the California Public Utilities Commission, and I will provide more information about that shortly. They can include legislators. This past year, there was a bill, Assembly Bill 1139, that would have done, in my opinion, a more draconian version of what there's a proposal before the net energy metering 3.0 proceeding, which I will talk about as well. But so there were some legislators that were trying to do this in the legislature. And anytime that we run bills, whether it's defensive, like 1139, we did not support, and we were able to defeat it on the floor of the legislature, or when we run bills that we co-sponsor, like automated solar permitting, which is the issue that I'm primarily working on. It's good to know with the legislature as well, what makes them tick. The governor's office, very, very important. The governor's office, of course, sets the framework for California's clean energy goals. He also is tuned in about what is important to small businesses and business in general in California. And of course, he does appoint regulators like all the members of the California Public Utilities Commission. So that's a really important stakeholder to keep in mind. Consumers who are by and large very price conscious. So if you do something that will hurt any part of the distributed generation industry or any part of the clean energy economy as a whole, consumers will send price signals, and they're very, by and large, accepting early adopters. They're very price sensitive. So if a solar panel costs a few $1,000s more than it does now, they might not be inclined to purchase it. The environmental community, which is not monolithic, but of course are very important, understanding what they care about, and ratepayer advocates as well. And we will talk about some of this. We're going to actually do an exercise towards the end where we will break you up into different groups. Some of you will be in the context of the net energy metering 3.0 proceeding, which I will talk about in the next presentation. The ratepayer advocates are actually approximate the side that the utility scale stakeholders are taking, investor-owned utilities. So that will be one group. The environmental justice community, which by no means is monolithic, but that will be another group, and solar advocates, and the businesses we represent plus solar users will be the third group. So it's good to know who your friends and your foes are, and keep in mind that there's an old adage in politics: there are no permanent friends or enemies. So and I actually see this more as, enemy is such a loaded term. So I call them adversaries on each particular topic. And then who's within your coalition? And we try to build coalitions as well. On a given issue, there's probably going to be another side, at least one, and they're going to be building a coalition as well. So we'll talk about that. Two other slides that I thought are really important as framing. Here are all the different stakeholders. So we have the state legislature, the Senate and the Assembly, also the governor's office. The governor appoints members of the Public Utilities Commission in California. The Public Utilities Commission deals with investor-owned utilities, regulating them, such as PG&E, SoCal Gas, San Diego Gas and Electric, and SoCal Edison. And then as well, there's the California Energy Commission, and they deal with also lots of issues that we work on, primarily around the solar mandate right now, building codes like Title 24, that's the title that deals with building codes, electrification of infrastructure and buildings. And then there are also smaller agencies like LA Department of Water and Power. There are municipal utilities, and there are community choice aggregators, which are local utilities. I live in Berkeley, so Berkeley, Alameda County. Most of Alameda County is served by East Bay Community Energy, which is the local community choice aggregator. And those aggregators, they're supposed to take the role of an investor-owned utility. So instead of instead of shareholders, they are statutorily barred from running a profit. But obviously, in order to achieve procurement power of a large scale, they have to run a significant surplus that then goes into programs as well. So that's a little bit about the ecosystem. And this is kind of an important slide. So what are the drivers from a customer point of view? Where is the value that a customer finds to be important? And what are the different locus points at which decisions are made? Who influences whom and how? So here are some examples. There are energy efficiency rebate dollars. And so there are programs that have been put together. Previously, this was under Prop 39. Now there are some successor programs around that. And we're always looking into the future. There are proceedings being done at the California Public Utilities Commission, the California Energy Commission, and of course, with a lot of work in the legislature. Solar net energy metering. This is, it's been billed by observers as the quote unquote mother of all proceedings. And there's going to be a proposed decision likely coming out December 10th, with a final decision likely to come out in January or February of next year. And a lot of the workshopping that we're going to do will focus on that. These are rules. The rules themselves are determined at the CPUC level, but they're often guided by the legislature. And for example, that was Assembly Bill 1139. And even though that bill didn't pass, there are a number of legislators, including at the Assembly and Senate Energy Utilities Committees, that are very tuned into what's going on right now at the CPUC around this. What is the rate design of a bill? So how is this all going to work? For instance, is there going to be a fixed charge on solar and storage customers? There are other forms of fixed charges, which has been the subject of prior Public Utilities Commission proceedings. Just because we only have an hour together, I'm not going to focus as much on that, but happy to answer any questions. And yes, this is the last slide on this deck. And after that, I will present on full screen. Here's some other questions. Storage added onto solar or standalone. So there's an incentive program called the Storage Self-Generation Incentive Program. And that is the program that incentivizes folks to purchase battery storage and then receive credit for storage that they don't use, that they sell back to the grid. It's supposed to incentivize early adopters because battery storage is expensive, unless you're Elon Musk and can afford it. And just sold, was it 5 billion worth of shares of Tesla. How do PV panels get interconnected to the system? Those are some of the decisions that are done at the PUC level as well. And there's legislation that had to be passed to create timelines for that. Permitting policy, labor law, is there going to be prevailing wage as a requirement, for instance? Are there going to be local hire provisions? Who is able to or not able to do interconnection or install the panels themselves? Do they have to be licensed electricians, which tends to be done through a union shop? Or can they be trained and qualified, but not as electricians? And then where is most of the customer value found? Because again, the customers are very price sensitive. Any little thing can send a price signal that can upturn any one of these industries. And finally, again, we just have an hour, but with the Build Back Better plan, we don't know yet what the investment tax credit is going to look like for solar and storage, but it is something that we're tracking at the federal level, especially since incentives in California for solar and storage are largely drying out. And so the remaining incentive, that's a major incentive program, is really driven by federal policy. So I am going to share, this is a presentation that my boss, Bernadette Del Chiaro at CALSA did to the Clean Energy Leadership Institute as a side point. If anyone wants to talk about CLI, that program is amazing. I've gone through it. Several of our YPE board members have gone through it as well. Definitely encourage you to apply when applications open next year. Let me just find the present button. Okay. And let me know when. Can you see this as a full screen?
It's perfect.
Excellent. Okay. So what is CALSA? This is the ecosystem. At the time, we were at 650 members. We're at over 700 members now. This is a rough split of who is a member of CALSA. Nearly half of us are contractors and developers. We also represent service providers, manufacturers, and other organizations. So we've built, again, this is a July 2021 slide deck. So things have expanded 3 months later and continue to. But we built 1.2 million solar systems in 16 years, 13 billion kilowatt hours of electricity, which is equivalent to the output of 8 large natural gas plants. In fact, with the oil spill that tragically happened earlier in the fall, at Huntington Beach, we were able to calculate what is the equivalency of the oil that was spilled. And we found that it would have been enough to power 5 homes for 20 years apiece for the lifetime of their photovoltaic system. So just remember that next time you hear oil spill, remember that the only thing that has happened with a solar spill is a really sunny day. We've avoided a lot of cars off the road and the equivalent of natural gas plants, lots of smog, 450 trillion BTUs of natural gas avoided. And we build 400 solar systems every day, which is the equivalent of taking 1 coal plant offline every 5 months. This is the breakdown of California. You can see that utility scale is about 15 gigawatt. And then we represent, we split non-residential PV with the utilities. But basically behind the meter accounts for about 40% of California's clean energy portfolio. So how did we do it? Being agile, responding to, there's another time-worn quote around never let a good crisis pass you by. You know, it does prevent an opportunity. Right now, with net energy metering 3.0, it truly is an existential threat for our companies. And we have seen other states like Nevada basically do something that is similar to what is being proposed by some stakeholders in front of the CPUC. And we literally saw thousands of jobs be lost overnight. These were good paying jobs that left the state. A lot of livelihoods destroyed. But that is also an opportunity for us to show our value proposition to our members. We have never had as large of a following and as large of a membership as we do today because of this and other existential crises. It's important to have politicians that support the work that we're doing for obvious reasons. And then, you know, we have to stand for something. So we take sound policy that provides a important bottom line and good value proposition for customers. We take that very seriously. We work with committed businesses and we organize with an engaged public. So for instance, we are the business end. We work with a very scrappy, small organization called the Solar Rights Alliance. The Solar Rights Alliance represents over 1 million solar rights advocates. Plus, there are, at this point, over 450 organizations, local elected officials, affordable housing providers, and others to a coalition letter. And that is how we engage the public in our effort. So I wanted to just provide some information about, this was the Million Solar Roofs Initiative, SB1. This was under Schwarzenegger. It locked in a 10-year program. It extended the net energy metering, which is the policy that allows behind the meter solar and storage to happen. It included all utilities, and solar became a standard feature of new homes. And you can see here how much impact this program actually had. So SB1 was signed in 2006. We got a really valuable federal tax credit in 2008. And then basically we saw a proliferation of solar, like it just blew up. You see a little dip with the net energy metering 2.0 policy. And again, to the point that consumers are very price sensitive, NEM 2.0 put some guardrails which tamped down the incentives that consumers were getting to produce new solar and storage. And we saw a dip in the generation, but we were able to bounce back. Again, we don't know what's going to happen with NEM 3, but it could have the opportunity, if it goes the wrong way for us, to have a much bigger impact than the impact of NEM 2 was. So my appeal is, let's keep building. Solar is the catalyst for change. And we have now seen even more of this with the Ford Lightning pickup truck that can power your whole home. The promise of zero carbon homes. The California Energy Commission just became the first state in the nation to have a all electric code as part of Title 24. And the Biden administration just put out a proposal to actually require this nationally. So it really starts with one household, and that one household, that early adopter, encourages other neighbors to, they see how easy it is, if it is easy, with permitting, which sometimes it isn't, and that's where I come in. And if it's affordable, which sometimes it's not, which is where we come in. But assuming we can get to an inflection point where a bunch of neighborhoods work together to invest in PV plus storage, then the whole community does this as well. And because of the community support for something like this, election officials create policies that do more of this. Solar is a catalyst for change for a number of industries. And I'm going to focus on, NEM 3 is going to touch on all of these. It's going to impact whether it will be affordable, not just for residential, but for schools, government facilities, farms, commercial properties, low income and multifamily homes, and new homes, including this new Title 24 mandate, because they're supposed to be price sensitive for consumers. It's going to impact all of this. So we have seen that this is something that is, I mean, sometimes solar and storage is billed as this affluent coastal community thing, but there's actually 5 times more solar in a frontline community, oil country in California, which is Kern County, 5 times more solar than San Francisco. And it's the same population. And this is an example of, in 2010, this is a nice graph because it shows both the scale and which households are driving solar adoption. So in 2010, we see, I mean, this is a more than 7-fold increase over 9 years in solar adoption. But what we can also see here is the same numbers of upper income, over 200K median household, as low and moderate income, which is defined here as under 100K in 2010. In 2019, and this has only continued on that trajectory, the highest growth of solar adopters has been on the, this is what I would call the working class and the middle class side. And this is another convenient way to show how like actually the 15K and under household adoption has now surpassed the one that is 250K and more. And now we can build 1 million solar batteries too. So guess what? As of a month ago, the largest battery is not at Moss Landing. It is actually in your garage. It's all of these batteries strung together that can allow for virtual power plants and communities to work together. Energy storage is the Swiss Army knife of life, if you will. It supports so many important things, all of these services. And I'm gonna skip some of this, but definitely happy to geek out with you about what all of this means. And you can see here, local solar saves US ratepayers, will save US ratepayers if it continues at its current trajectory, $500 billion by 2050. And here we can see an example of, as the number of installations has grown, the cost of it before any rebates kick in have gone down. And the same is the promise of happening with storage. So this is near and dear to my heart. I am actually taking the weekend off except for this presentation. I'm in Paradise right now. Paradise was affected by devastating fires. A lot of folks lost their lives and livelihoods here. We're going to be meeting with a friend of ours later today who lost his home in Paradise and had to rebuild. Leadership is really important, and Governor Newsom is the individual that, again, has a lot of power to tell his CPUC commissioners either keep solar and storage growing and let's support small businesses and let's not take this proceeding off the rails. Or he can sit back and not do that. It is his choice, but we have to advocate. So that is what we have been doing. And Solar Rights Alliance, again, is the grassroots arm of what we do. And of course, keeping businesses strong is the only way that we're going to be able to continue to meet our resiliency and climate action goals. So we're going to break up into groups in a little bit, and each of you is going to have a few different fact sheets from, one will be from the utilities and ratepayer advocates for the purpose of net energy metering 3.0. The ratepayer advocates like Torn have adopted a similar position to the utilities. And others of you will be in a group representing solar advocates. And then there will be a third group with talking points from members of the EJ community. And again, I want to be very clear that the EJ community is not monolithic. And so actually those talking points will look a little bit different. But this is what it comes out to. Some are claiming that rooftop solar is expensive, a toy of the rich, bad for poor people, and we are able to achieve 100% of our renewable goals just through solar and wind farms, industrial scale solar and wind farms. Versus on the other side, there are these arguments: we want clean energy choices, solutions, reliable power, clean air, and we want to be a part of the solution. So a brief history, again, in 2013, the legislature removed a cap and told the CPUC to create a new net energy metering tariff, which is what has led to the proliferation of PV plus storage. It's been expanded 5 times in the state legislature since then. And here we can see, again, I'm going to have to gloss over this just for time, but there were certain things in NEM 2.0 that have been steps backwards from our perspective. but there were also some good parts too as well. And that's why that dip was not as pronounced as it could have been in PV adoption. So we were able to defeat AB 1139, which was a similar proposal that was introduced with legislation. But there is this NEM 3 proceeding that is really, this is the 9th inning, and we are on bat. And it's going to be up to us to decide, well, what kind of influence on the governor we actually have, or on the CPUC. It's overseen by 5 commissioners appointed by 2 governors. And decision outcomes are still 3 weeks out, very much in play. This is the investor-owned utility proposal. The utilities have proposed cutting the net energy metering credit by 75%, adding a $60 to $90 a month fee on residential, and then having a monthly true-up charge, which is true-up just means at the end of the year, if you're a solar user and you know, they look at how much it costs the utilities to provide you energy, you might be stuck with another bill. Here are three fundamental principles. Number 1, don't touch behind the meter. We have a glide path. We definitely don't believe that there should be status quo, but it's a glide path that allows our customers our customers that use solar and storage, and the businesses we represent, to be able to not lose large parts of their business and to stay intact. We oppose a solar specific fixed charge, and to my previous point, any change must be gradual. And that is actually the last slide. So perfect timing. We have about 20 minutes. And so I believe, Melina, were you able to create 3 groups?
Yes. Do you want me to share the folder first?
Yes, that would be great. So Melina is going to share a folder, and you will see that in there are different talking points. There are 4 things from Solar Advocates. There are 2 things from EJ Orgs, and there are 2 things from Utility Ratepayer Advocates. This is going to be a very, very mini version of what you would do if we had more time. There are 19 different filings that have been submitted to the CPUC on this proceeding. And again, if we had more time, we would actually give you a day to mine through all these filings and opening briefs and rebuttals and closing briefs. And then you would represent basically the group that you're assigned to. We don't have that time, so we will give you basically 10 minutes to skim through the fact sheets. And my suggestion is to just divide and conquer, assign reading to different parts of your group, and then talk about kind of the highlights and takeaways. And then we will bring you back in 10 minutes, and you will have an opportunity for 2 or 3 minutes to just present the highlights. Again, this is you may be working for a utility and you end up getting paired up with Solar Advocates or vice versa. For the purpose of this exercise, it doesn't matter. This was randomly drawn. And it's just kind of to show, especially, you know, please don't take personally if you do work for a utility or aspire to. It just shows how passionate folks are about this issue. It really is the mother of all proceedings at the CPUC in recent history. So with that, any questions before we break up into groups? Hearing none, we're going to break up into close out.
Sounds good with me.
Hi, everyone. Welcome back. We're just waiting for the rest of the breakout groups to close. Melina, are they on a 1-minute timer?
Yes, yeah.
Perfect.
They will close in 10 seconds.
Excellent. Okay, I think we have everyone here. Welcome back. Again, apologies for how little time this was. This is a very mini preview of what folks that are dealing with proceedings like this spend months, sometimes years, analyzing and mining and then arguing, sometimes writing as well. So what I would invite you to do is each of you will take about 2.5 minutes per group. Hopefully you've picked one presenter. In the EJ group, there will be 2 different presenters. And just to summarize the points you read and make your best attempt at an argument for why we all need to come to, just come to embrace the point of view that you will be representing for the purpose of this exercise. Any questions before we start? Okay, let's hear from the utilities group first. Who would like to present?
I will speak on that. Hi, my name is Soren. I represent the utilities and the consumer ratepayer advocates. So we've heard a lot from the solar industry about, how when you support solar power, then you end up with more solar panels, and if you change NEM, then you see a reduction in solar panels, and that kind of takes as a given that more solar panels must always be a good thing. And that's true to some extent, but it's not as black and white as that. When you end up with in a situation when you have so many solar panels on roofs, all generating at the same time in the middle of the day, and particularly locally, the sunny days are, if it's sunny at my house, it's sunny at my neighbor's house. The value that's actually provided by those solar panels to the grid is not so high. So we get to this situation where the avoided cost, which is a term that the utilities love using, is not that high and is going down the more solar panels that you have. There are a lot of costs that remain fixed regardless of how much energy is being produced. Things like the capacity and the generation to provide power at night, as well as the transmission costs and the grid costs required to bring that power to you at those times. By over subsidizing that, by giving offsetting the full retail rate, you're basically pushing all of those costs onto the remaining customers. Those costs aren't going down, so that's more costs being paid by fewer people. Those people tend to be poorer, and now their rates are going up by even more. We've got spiraling utility rates here, and it's just going to get worse and worse for lower income people.
Well done. Good job. Yes, let's give Soren a virtual round of applause. This was really good stuff. Excellent job. Next, let's hear from the rooftop solar advocates.
Yeah, so hi everyone, my name is Brandon. I'm representing solar advocates, rooftop solar advocates, and to address the points made by the Utilities Commission, well, we do recognize that there is kind of a, as I said, more solar panels doesn't necessarily always mean that it's more good. The primary thing is that as Soren said and the Utilities Commission said, it is not so black and white. Neither is it just a question of whether or not including or not including solar will lead to good or bad. In previous years, we've actually been able to see that the cost shift that the utilities love to tout actually includes some accounting fallibilities, such as not including the long-term savings of infrastructure that has already been built, as well as the potential environmental costs of disaster caused by avoided infrastructure that needs to be built. Here in California, most famously with the 2019 Paradise fires that Igor was talking about earlier, a lot of the time is these high energy power transmission lines that cause these issues. And more rooftop solar means more localized power, which means less infrastructure that needs to be built, as well as allowing for more sustainably built community solar projects, which actually allow low income and moderate income people to benefit directly from solar projects, as opposed to a utility scale system where they have no input. So actually providing more rooftop solar options and providing funding will provide longer term savings and allow the participation of people who otherwise would have no say whatsoever in where their energy is coming from. And that idea is also extended to this idea of consumer costs and cost shifting, that just because someone is being able to be included doesn't mean that everyone else is necessarily losing. It's just always beneficial for utilities to be able to control all aspects of energy production and consumption.
Well done. That was exactly 2 minutes. Let's give Brandon a virtual round of applause. Excellent job. And we're going to hear from the EJ group next. And since there were, again, to my point earlier, there is not a single EJ organization. There are many, and they do have slightly different perspectives. We're going to hear from 2 different takes from different parts of the EJ community. And so whoever wants to start, please take it away.
I can go. Hi, my name is Alona. I'm representing a coalition of EJ groups. I'm going to reject the utilities' claim that rooftop solar increases and shifts costs onto existing consumers from consumers that are moving onto solar. Essentially, it significantly reduces the cost of maintenance and wear and tear on infrastructure, which is a cost associated with existing utilities. And low-income communities are actually more heavily impacted by the climate change and then breakdowns of existing utilities, such as blackouts that prevent air conditioning during warming climates. So if the claim is that, this is going to increase costs for lower income communities, I'm going to refute that. And the current system is unequally impacting certain groups over others, and solar is a way to share the load, and NEM increases accessibility of those programs. Done.
Good job. Virtual round of applause. Let's hear from EJ group.
Yes, my name is Jake Coleman. I'm representing the Energy Justice Coalition, and in contrast to some of our environmental justice colleagues, we're looking to protect low-income communities and ratepayers by advocating for a very targeted adjustment to net metering and promoting the investment of different funds into lower income communities and previously marginalized groups who are not being equitably served by the transition to renewables. That includes investment in multifamily home structure developments, including solar for them, prioritizing community ownership and governance, advocating for targeted hiring by clean energy companies for previously marginalized or groups that have not been included in the current clean energy workforce, as well as trying to promote affordability among different communities who might be targeted by a transition to fully rooftop solar, and making sure that all communities are equitably served during this transition, and investing in distributed, resilient energy systems that protect communities across the state in various conditions. Thank you.
Good job. All right. Virtual round of applause to Jake and everyone. These documents will be available for you all to take a look at. The only thing I ask, I think that's the second environmental justice document on there. The one from CEEE is still embargoed. It has not yet gone out to the governor's office. So I just ask that you don't share that out yet. So you have a sneak preview of it. With that, I'm going to leave my contact info in the chat. Please don't hesitate to reach out anytime. And thank you so much for your participation. You all did an excellent job. And we would be very fortunate to call you our colleagues. And, for those of you that are looking to join the clean energy economy, this is the most important time right now to do it. So would love to work with y'all. Thank you.
Awesome. I'm going to go ahead and with that, we'll go ahead and transition to project finance workshop. Thank you everyone for sticking with us while we were a few minutes late. So let me go ahead and spotlight Hayden, and Pat will kick us off with introductions.
Great, thanks, Buena. I will try to keep this short because we're a little bit over, but not too bad. So thanks everyone again for joining this project finance session. We have an awesome session here today. I am very excited to have Hayden from Pivotal 180. I will keep the introduction short. I'll just say that when I was pivoting my career into clean energy finance, I found Pivotal 180 and took their renewable energy project finance course, and cannot recommend it enough. It is super, super helpful for anyone who's trying to get into the space. Happy to talk about that more in my experience with it, but I'd rather give the time to Hayden to actually show you some of the value in project finance and how these different parties come together to build a project.
Thank you, Pat. Just checking two things. One, that people can now see my screen, and two, that you can hear me.
Perfect.
Okay, technology challenge number one, overcome. So first of all, thank you so much for having me. I'm really honored to be here, and I love spending time with YPE. I'll try, and I know I've got a little bit less time, so I'll go a little bit quicker here, but I believe the session is recorded, so you obviously have access to it, and I will stick around after. I know you're going to break from, I think, on the hour for 30 minutes, so I can stick around and answer any questions if people have them. Okay, so really quickly, Pivotal 180, just for your background, is really a business that does a couple of things. It really does advisory work, and what I mean by advisory is helping sort of structure transactions to make them financeable. And the other core element of our business is teaching. So we teach people project finance and how to do it and how to transact. That's kind of what we do. My background, I'm from New Zealand, but I've spent almost my entire career doing project finance advisory, advising on acquisitions of assets and how to finance them. That's what I've done. And I teach, obviously, through Pivotal 180 and also at Columbia University and at Yale University and the University of Cape Town. I'm from New Zealand, so if you find my accent difficult to follow at any stage, just raise your hand and tell me to slow down, and I will do my best. So, as you know, this session is really around project finance. And maybe the first question is, why project finance? Why is project finance important? Well, it's traditionally been one of the main ways that we've financed renewable energy projects and also some battery storage projects, although there's not so many of those yet. And it's probably a likely way of how we're going to finance things like green hydrogen and carbon capture projects in the future as well. So sort of a central way of financing projects with very large capital costs. Just a heads up, I know there's a big thunderstorm about to roll through New York, where I'm based, so hopefully that is not too disruptive in the background. But if you hear funny noise in the background, that is what it's from. Okay, so as jump into this, I like to sort of start introducing project finance by asking what we call a question of the day. And it's a really hard and almost impossible sort of question. And the question is, how do we convince lenders and investors to provide hundreds of millions of dollars to a company that has no credit history, no employees, it's never generated any cash flow, it's never operated, and there's no guarantees from anybody who's creditworthy to repay the loan to make good on the investment? And that sounds like a ridiculous question. It sounds like something that's just plain impossible. It doesn't seem like a good set of investment circumstances for anybody, but actually, this is how hundreds of billions of dollars of clean energy has been financed and infrastructure assets every single year. And you can obviously imagine that the answer to this question is project finance. So I'll talk a little bit about the sort of four main tenements of project finance that we cover. And the first one is something called non-recourse loans and obligations. Now, what do I mean by non-recourse? Well, some sort of new venture will establish a project company, and that project company is typically called either a special purpose vehicle, a special purpose entity, a special purpose company. And you can see the abbreviations on screen. They all mean exactly the same thing. It's just different terminology for different people. And this project company, this SPV, which I'll use here, will typically borrow a lot of money to acquire some assets or to build some assets. And what I mean by non-recourse is the obligation to actually repay any loan will stay at the level of this SPV and not at the level of any investors in their special purpose vehicle, their SPV. So what I mean by that is non-recourse means that the lenders, the people who are lending us money, are relying only on this new vehicle, this special purpose company, to repay the loan. Financial obligations are recourse to the project company. Financial obligations to repay the loan are non-recourse to the actual investors in the project, the people that own the SPV. Something goes wrong, the lenders can't come to the people that own this company and ask for the loan to be repaid. They can only go to this special purpose vehicle, the SPV. That's number one. Number two, project finance is all about cash flow. And sorry, I should have said up front, just feel free to interrupt and ask questions rather than just wait to the end, ask them as they go, rather than sort of holding them to the back. And if you feel uncomfortable raising a question out loud, I am watching the chat function as well. So project finance is also cash flow. And what I kind of mean by this is the way we evaluate these projects is all about expected future cash flows and not collateral. And when I say collateral, think about sort of like a home loan. When you get a mortgage for a home, the way that loan is sort of evaluated is based on some sort of appraisal that puts a value on the actual asset. And what happens with a home loan, lenders will advance some percentage against that home value based on some sort of like loan to value ratio. And what we see here quite commonly in the US is that we can typically borrow maybe say 80% of the appraised value of the home. And the idea behind that sort of collateral loan is if I can't repay my mortgage for some reason, the lender can repossess my home. They'll foreclose on the home, they'll then sell the home, and they'll use sort of the money from the sale of that home to repay themselves. And the idea is because they only lent me 80% of the value of the home, there's a pretty good chance that they will recover all of their money by selling that house. But if you sort of thought about this from the context of, let's say, a solar project, you can't take down a solar project and sell each of the individual panels and all of the parts and reassemble it somewhere else, because you would just never recover the value of your investment. It wouldn't work that way. It's not, and it's also not as sort of a liquid a market as homes. There's not enough buyers out there. The only way that our investment is in the money, both for debt and equity, is if the project is actually operating in place and it's in service. It's generating cash flow. The valuation of the project is based on its ability to generate cash, okay, not collateral. Collateral doesn't have the same value here. And so, you know, if that's the case and it's all based on future cash flow, lenders need to know that there's some certainty in the types of cash flows. They don't want just wild guesses. Hey, I think I'm going to make $100 million next year. I don't really know, but that's my guess. That's not good enough. They want some certainty with this thing that's never operated, never existed, never had any employees. And so the way we try and get reliable cash flow to make projects project financeable, the way we get there is we assemble a network of different contracts. And these contracts tell us things like who's obligated to build this project, who's obligated to run it, and who's obligated to buy from the project whatever the project makes. Let's call it renewable energy, so energy. So that's number one. Number two, the technologies that we use in project finance, if you're going to lend hundreds of millions of dollars to something, you want to know that the technology works. And so quite often when you think about, like, let's say a wind farm, who are the people that provide turbines to wind farms? Vestas, Siemens, GE, they're big, well-known names, and using technology that we understand, because we've got to make forecasts of these cash flows. We want to know things work. We also want to ensure that we sort of giving those contracts to parties or the people we're contracting with, they're creditworthy. We want to know that they're financially strong enough to be able to follow through on the obligations they've got. They can better buy energy from me for, let's call it 20 years. Are they financially strong enough to do that? And even with sort of all the best contracts in the world and improving technology, we need those counterparties to be creditworthy, to be able to fulfill those obligations. And what these contracts will actually say is they'll very clearly specify, with these different parties, who's responsible for what particular risk. And I'll dive into this one a little bit later, but who's responsible for actually building this thing on time and on budget, for example. So cash flows based on the different contracts and trying to allocate risk to the parties who are best able to take it, and non-recourse. The final one I'll talk about just briefly is a concept called limited liability. And so it's kind of like the non-recourse thing, but this is in relation to equity investors. And the idea is that any liabilities that are created at the project company will stay at the project company. So if there's a lawsuit, for example, that would remain at the project company level and would not come back to harm me, for example, if I'd set up this SPV as the owner of that project. So kind of like non-recourse, but from a equity holder's standpoint. Now, I'll dive into these a little bit more detail in a second, but project finance is not something new. It's been around for a very long time. In fact, it started way back in ancient Greece. Shipping voyages were financed with non-recourse loans, based on the expected cash flows that would come off the bounty from those ships. 1860s, Suez Canal was project financed by a French special purpose vehicle. It went bankrupt, but obviously the Suez Canal is still there, even if it's sometimes blocked. 1970s North Sea oil development in the US, 1980s. This has been going for a long, long time. And sort of, I think from the 1990s, really, this was expanded well beyond sort of oil and gas and power plants through core infrastructure, hospitals, schools, toll roads. So project finance itself as a tool is kind of used across everything in the sort of broader infrastructure world. Now, a little bit just to make sure we're clear on sort of some language I'm going to use going forward. But what I've got sort of shown on the screen is I've got some sort of project asset. Let's pretend that's a wind farm, and there could be 2 or 3 different project assets down here. And typically they are owned by this special purpose vehicle. So this is a separate company that owns the individual assets down here, each of the turbines, for example. And this particular company is normally some sort of limited liability company that is owned by some sponsors. And sponsors, I mean the ultimate equity owners of the project. Okay, so the people that own the SPV, they own it directly themselves. And sort of the idea of these structures is that this is that non-recourse structure. So, for example, if the banks lend to this SPV here and something goes wrong, they can't go knocking on the doors of the sponsors asking for the money. They can only knock on the door of the SPV, which is why we're trying to contract risks and forecast cash flows as best we can, because this thing's never operated, existed, or had any employees. The triangle thing here is rather than ask the question at this stage, just is really related to sort of tax structures. The SPVs, these things here are not typically taxed in the US. The people that pay tax are these corporations. Corporations typically on these sort of corporate diagrams are indicated by a rectangle, and triangle means it's a pass-through structure. I won't dive too much into that. I do want to come back though a little bit to this limited liability piece. You know, non-recourse, hopefully that's clear, but limited liability is kind of a weird thing. So I want to dive a little bit into the idea of two types of liability, limited and unlimited liability, and a little bit around the corporate structure, starting with a corporation and a company versus a shareholder. So we can all become shareholders in companies. You know, we can all buy equity. We can, any company that trades in stocks, you can get a Robinhood app or whatever you want to get, and you can invest in any stock on the stock exchange. Now, there's a difference between the liability of the company and the shareholder. Let's say you own shares in British Petroleum. Unfortunately, there is a massive environmental catastrophe, like some sort of oil spill. And let's say that is just so bad that it sends BP into bankruptcy. Now, the idea here is that none of BP's creditors can demand payment from you, right, as an individual shareholder. You are protected by the fact that BP is the corporation and you're just a shareholder of that corporation. Okay, you don't actually make any decisions in how this business runs or operates. You just invest in capital. The people that make the decisions are the management of the company itself. So there's a difference between the liability of each of these parties. The shareholder, the maximum amount of money that you could lose if you invested in BP is the value of those shares. That's your limited liability. But the company management, they can have unlimited liability if they make bad decisions. You know, they do things again into trouble. Maybe they, you know, do something illegal, or they weren't maintaining safety standards that caused the oil spill in the first place. So shareholders have limited liability based on how much they invested. Companies can have unlimited liability. May not have the ability to pay, but they certainly carry unlimited liability. You might see this in a different sort of format. Quite often in the US, we structure limited liability companies or partnerships for our companies. The actual company itself is called either a limited liability company or some sort of partnership. And often we see the word general partner or limited partner. Limited partner is like the shareholder. General partner is responsible for running the business, just like the company. So just a different word for company and shareholder. And as I sort of mentioned, quite often the SPV is a limited liability company. And this is just different terminology. Managing member is like the company. Non-managing member is like the shareholder. But there's two different positions, some with limited liability and some with unlimited liability. Now, you might sort of think, well, why would anyone ever agree to be a general partner or a managing member? Now, you can't just have one of these. You can't have a shareholder without a company. You can't have a company without shareholders. So you've got to have both. And someone has to be the general partner. So someone must take unlimited liability. So that sounds really scary and terrifying. But without going into details of it today, there's actually ways that we can structure legal limits on that liability as well. Okay, so even that unlimited liability, we can structure around it to a large degree. Now, what sort of happens is just think that the shareholder or the limited partner or the non-managing member doesn't really have, they just have limited liability. Now, that doesn't always hold true because what we have to do is we have to actually make sure that we're following certain rules. One rule, for example, is, you know, the shareholder, for example, still needs to know and ensure that the company is actually, you know, preparing, having board meetings, has proper audited financial statements, for example. If you're a investor in these projects and there is no board meetings ever, and there is no, you know, books and records, for example, then you can be deemed to have pierced what we call the corporate veil. You may end up having unlimited liability here too. So it's not just like, hey, I can be a shareholder in these companies and just walk away. You've actually still got some obligations. And also, for example, in some jurisdictions, let's say, for example, environmental issues or someone raised the employee pension plan, sometimes this idea of limited liability can be thrown out the window by the court. So it's not just, it's always limited liability, there's a bit more protection you need to think about, okay, without going into details. Okay, so they're the main elements that sort of kick off project finance. And just think about it as it's all about cash flow. It's all about the sharing of risk between various parties. And it boils down to this limited liability from a risk standpoint or non-recourse debt. The lenders cannot come back to the owners, the corporations, to get the money repaid. Now, from that, I want to sort of dive into a little bit about how sort of project finance works. So I want to think about who are the parties to these transactions, what are their roles, their responsibilities, what are the major legal contracts, and how do we structure this in the right sort of way? How, you know, who gets paid, how? And sometimes we like to sort of say, we're going to start with maybe the hero of the story, and we'll call this the developer. The developer is the person that sort of comes up with the idea of this solar project, a wind project, or green hydrogen project. And they're the ones that are responsible up front for assembling all the pieces, like identifying where to put the project, secure the right to actually use the land, negotiate the initial contracts. I'll talk through some of those. Maybe select the equipment or the vendors. What panels are we using? What turbines are we using? And sometimes they're also negotiating sort of financing packages, for example, the amount of debt they can get. And maybe they're also finding equity investors, people who are going to put in an equity to the project. And kind of what they do is they collate all this information and they contribute that information or the contracts into this project company, this special purpose vehicle, the SPV. So the developer kind of started this project company, this SPV. Next one I can touch on briefly is the lender. And the developer would typically, depending on the type of developer, but they would typically approach, say, a lender or a number of different lenders. And the lenders themselves will determine sort of how much the project can support these non-recourse loans. So the lenders will conduct what we call due diligence, basically look through the contracts, make sure the contracts are all sound. You know, is the forecast for the amount of energy we think we're going to generate, does that look realistic? So they really go into the details of like, do I believe the future cash flows are going to be what this SPV is forecasting? Because it's all about future cash flows. And what they'll do is they'll size the loan capacity of this project. They will structure specific terms. You know, what are the different covenants on these loans? And ultimately, they will provide some sort of debt. And normally there's two different types of debt we talk about in project finance. The first one is a construction loan, and the second is a term loan. And the term loan is quite often called the take-out financing, or maybe the permanent financing as well. And the reason we have two different loans is they're really, really different, and they have really different risk profiles. Construction period is different sort of risks to anyone who, compared to operating of the project. And sort of one of the major differences is construction loans are typically funded, you know, over time through construction, you know, maybe every month, every time we achieve some sort of successful milestone. So, for example, during construction, the lenders will actually hire what we call an independent engineer, a technical expert who will walk the site. They will look at all sort of the drawings and the designs of the site and make sure the project is being built according to all the specifications. It's kind of a technical thing. So they're running around and checking that the project's being built according to plans. And if everything is being built according to plans, the engineer will issue a report to the lenders that said, hey, look, things are being built according to plans. We don't see any sort of major issues coming up. Go ahead and let them draw down their next amount of money next month. But if it's not looking okay, the lenders can actually refuse to fund any more money until construction is back on track. Now, one of the challenges obviously through construction is the project probably doesn't generate any revenue, any cash flow at this stage, right? But that sort of, what that means is that we have to actually raise enough money in construction to even pay like our interest on our loans. for that period as well. And so what happens is we have to raise enough money up front of this project to fund it all the way through construction. And you can kind of see how that construction period, this independent engineer and this monthly review of how much money you're able to draw down is really different to the term loan, which starts when the project goes into operations. Because once the project's in operations, the project can actually generate revenue and can start to pay down the loan, the interest on the loan and the principal repayments. And at this point, the role of sort of this independent engineer is no longer required. They might bring an engineer if something's looking wrong, but that role is no longer there. Now we're actually operating this project. And what happens is the term loan repays that initial construction loan. That's why it's called takeout financing. So the project basically fully pays the construction lender, and then we'll repay the permanent financing. And typically we repay this permanent financing over maybe 10 or 30 years. So really long time for us to pay back these loans because we're spending out a lot of money. Now, when I say take out the construction lender, when they take out this construction loan, I'm not necessarily saying these are two different banks. This could actually be like a paper takeout. It's not really actually drawing down money or paying anyone physically, but this loan does take out this loan because it's a whole different set of risks. It's a very different sort of position to the lenders. So we've got our lenders and our developers. And then just coming back to the developers for a second, some developers have quite a lot of money. They have sufficient capital. Oh, that's a good question. So Soren, your question, would I expect to have a lower interest rate on the term loan or the construction loan? It actually depends. It really does depend. So without getting into too much of the weeds, there are different risk profiles between these two. Now, in one example, you could say, so this idea of non-recourse loans, this idea of non-recourse only occurs once we get into the term loan period. When we're still building it, there is actually some recourse to the project sponsors. That recourse happens once we go to term loan, once we actually turn on the project and we start operating. And given there is some recourse sometimes through construction, you might say there's less risk if, let's say, GE or Siemens, for example, were owned the project and they were ensuring that the project was going to be built. That might be less risky than when Siemens and GE, it suddenly becomes non-recourse. Maybe the credit rating of GE is lower than the project. But in other instances, you can certainly say that construction is a more risky period than term loans. So you might see the interest rate higher as well. So it does depend on the specifics of the deal. Abhishek, come here a second. Cooper, bridge loan, let me come back to it if I have a bit of time at the end. Bridge loan is something very specific around tax equity typically, which is advancing money for another party, which I'm not going to get into today, called tax equity. Abhishek, you had a question?
Yeah, I just wanted to ask this term loan which you mentioned, is it like refinancing after the construction has happened?
Correct. So term loan is from the beginning of operations once the project's actually turned on. And the key here is that the lenders, it's not good enough just to go, hey, you guys hear the school in the background? It's insane. The key here is that the lenders won't be happy that you just built the project. They want to know the project has been turned on, that the project's operating properly, generating the amount of cash flows that you expected. And that's when we sort of claim the beginning of operations. And that's when the term loan comes and repays the construction loan. That's kind of, you can see why then it's not recourse, because you've proven the project generates the cash flow that you forecast.
And how often does this happen? Because I've seen like many projects like same lenders financing construction loan and term loan, like it continues for over the period. So in practice, how does that happen? Does this happen? So
this always happens. It's just it may not be two different lenders. So what there is, this really term loan is the falling away of this recourse to the owners of that project. And so there's what we call project completion, which happens at the end of construction, which is where you turn it on and make sure that it actually operates. This always happens. It may just not be documented exactly that way, but this conversion to a non-recourse loan always happens. It could be two lenders, it may be the same.
Okay.
Yeah, so Jake, question here. Mezzanine financing, I'll come back to the end if we've got time. But Jake, on your question about if lenders refuse to fund the next tranche, sponsors would have to, and it was really a big problem, sponsors would go and have to raise more money from somewhere else to get it back on track. But normally what happens is the sponsors need to have a certain amount of contingency of additional funding available such that lenders are happy. Cool. And I think some of this, yeah, so some of this money is saying will come into the project development workshop. Let me continue a little bit. I'll keep an eye on some questions. So some developers have enough capital they can fund and own their own projects. Sometimes developers do not have enough money to actually fund projects. What they do is they run around and find the site and procure all the different counterparties for these contracts. And what they end up having to do is they sell their projects to investors at some point. Normally, the most common thing is right at the beginning of construction. And so quite a lot of developers run around, they're really good at doing that and setting projects up, but they don't want to operate these things. That's not their goal. And so what they typically do is sell to some sort of equity investor, someone who was going to hold the project for a longer period of time. And one time that equity investors come in, as I said, is the start of construction. And we call this notice to proceed, or NTP. It's just lots of silly acronyms and details in project finance. And what this NTP means is the contract's all ready to go. Equity investors can start funding and starting construction. And so some equity investors like to come in at the beginning of construction, but some equity investors don't like that risk of construction. They don't want to take construction risks. They only want to come in once the project's built and actually generating cash flow. And so some investors might come in at the end of construction, the beginning of operations. That beginning of operations, the technical term for it is commercial operations date, or COD. So different equity investors come in at different times. Majority of investors we see in the market, or a big number of them, come in here at the beginning of construction. Especially for like renewable energy, which has been done for lots of years now. People are kind of used to construction risks. So let's think about construction a little bit. What we sort of see in construction often is something called EPC contractor. EPC is a fancy word for engineering, procurement, and construction. And what they do is they design and engineer all of the technology. They procure all of the equipment and materials. They construct the project. They commission this new power plant. Their job is to build this project, basically. And the ideal contract here, and thinking about risk, the ideal contract that is going to make, and in project finance, you're thinking really about, it's a lot of debt. And sometimes the lenders will invest, in some instances, up to 90% of the capital. Okay, so lenders can invest a huge proportion of the funding, and they want to be protected from risk. They're worried that this project will cost more than's been forecasted. And so the lenders love, the EPC contractor to be called something fully wrapped. And what fully wrapped means is that the EPC contractor functions as a general contractor. And what that means is there's actually like electrical work here, mechanical work, civil work, building foundations, roads. There's lots of different pieces. And the world's biggest contractors don't actually do much of that work themselves. They outsource it to other parties. And what the lenders want is that there's one party responsible for everyone. And that's what this EPC contract is. One party responsible, coordinated to do this project. They guarantee all of the work of all of the subcontractors. So de-risk this as much as possible. And again, with a name, and a big sort of contractor with the right creditworthiness and the financial capacity. And the project company is really trying to shift risk onto the EPC contractor for the sake of the lenders. And there's two things here we'll talk about. One is date certain, and that just means the contract must be completed by a specific deadline. You must finish construction by this date. Another feature here to demand is some sort of fixed price contract. You want a nice fixed price contract so the project company knows exactly what it will cost to build this project and exactly when I can start operating this project and generating cash flows. That's kind of what the lenders are looking for. And the project company will also try and de-risk things by using proven technologies and getting strong guarantees. For example, my turbines that I buy from GE, I want guarantees from GE that those turbines are going to operate as expected, GE being a nice creditworthy sort of entity. So that's sort of EPC, and this is the perfect world. Might have some sort of fuel supplier. Let's say you've got a biomass type project, you're buying like wood chips or something else like that. You might want to get the perfect fuel supply agreement. Maybe it's also coal, gas, or diesel, or whatever else. And again, the perfect contract is a nice fixed price contract. Or a contract where I may be able to pass through the cost of my fuel to the person buying my energy. So look, I'm just going to send you an invoice for how much the fuel costs, and you pay that. So again, trying to de-risk this project as much as possible. Next, remember I said that the project company has often no employees or just a very few employees. And so we need someone who can actually operate this project. So we have this other type of contract called an operations and maintenance agreement, or O&M contractor. And the O&M provider is the party that's providing all the labor, managing the day-to-day operations. And if the project company is seeking again to manage risk, the ideal kind of O&M contract would be a fixed price contract. Get the picture, lots of fixed price things and fixed dated things. And this would also include some sort of guarantees for a specific level of performance, like this power plant will be available for X percentage of the time because you're maintaining it efficiently, et cetera, et cetera. And if it's not, if that power plant is not available for whatever percentage of time or days that you specify, then the project company may want to charge penalties across an O&M contractor, penalties for not performing. Okay, so you see the SPV is trying to, again, move some risk. Next one that is important is related to the off-taker. And we call this the power purchase agreement. And this is the most important agreement here. And I'll come back to your question, Alona. Just remind me at the end, because it's a really important question about new technology, and I can talk all day about it. So at the end, I'll just touch on it briefly. So the power purchase agreement is by far the most important contract between all of these parties. The reason is it typically governs up to about, so what's my screen, up to about 100% of the project's revenue. And certainly if we want to de-risk it, we want to typically sell 100% of our energy to one sort of off-taker. And this counterparty is called the off-taker, and typically this is some sort of credit-worthy utility. That's sort of the perfect world. It may not be, but this is the perfect world of project finance. And if you're looking for, obviously, someone who's creditworthy. Now, if we're trying to manage risk as a project company, the ideal contract here that we would want, and this is really common for renewables, is called a take or pay contract. And a take or pay contract is something that's really a fixed price PPA. Okay, and maybe it's a fixed price, but it escalates over time based on inflation or whatever. And what does off-taker? What does off-taker mean? Off-taker, by the way, is just a fancy word of the person buying your energy or your stuff. Person buying your stuff. And sort of the idea of take or pay contract is kind of interesting, because what that means is that the utility will pay, or the person buying your energy will pay you for the energy whether they take it or not. Okay, so whether or not the utility actually needs the power at that point in time, it must still pay you for whatever it's contracted to buy. Okay, so non-payment is not an option under this contract. It's really important because that revenue is going to be used. So just reading some of the comments. So, and I'm scraping the surface, obviously, some people have a bit of experience here, but the idea is that it is a fixed price and you must pay me for it whether you take the energy or not. Trying to make sure the project company has secure future cash flows. And we may actually be paid separately for the amount of energy we sell and also for just being available to sell energy. That's what I mean by capacity. So just if I'm available to sell energy, I may also be paid for that. In addition to selling, say, energy, I may also be able to sell something like renewable energy credits. And you'll see the words here, unbundled or bundled. Unbundled means I may be able to sell the RECs to a different party than who I sell energy to. And that depends on local markets and everything else. So this is the most important contract. All of this is about it's fixed price. Let's try and guarantee our cash flows as best as we can, because this project's never operated, never existed, never had any employees. Lending a lot of money. So how does sort of the money flow? Well, the lenders, and I'm sort of showing you here, 60 to 80% of the capex. It can be higher and it can be lower depending on the risk of the project. And the technology and how creditworthy it is, those sort of things come into play. Equity has to put in everything else. We use that money to pay the construction contract. And I say paid up front here, but it's paid over the construction duration. So that's the construction phase. And then what happens in the operating phase is obviously we receive revenue from some sort of energy offtake, the perfect world of getting nice fixed price and maybe renewable energy credits of some kind. And I use that money to do a few things. I've got to pay the lenders back their money. That's the principal. That's the repayment of the amount of the loan I took. Plus, I'm going to have to pay them interest. In addition to that, I will get hopefully some money left over for myself, the equity investor, for distributions. And I also have to pay the O&M contractor and maybe some fuel. So I'm going to pay all of my expenses. Okay, so and this is just one world of renewable energy as de-risked as possible. So I'll ask a few questions. We talked about all of these different parties, and they're the counterparties to the project company. And Dishan, I'll come in a second. What I want to think about how risk is allocated between these parties, because I talked about it's all about future cash flow, and it's all about sort of allocating that risk between the different parties. Putting the risk on to the parties who are best able to deal with a specific risk. So I'm going to take one example, and Dishan, I'll let you ask a question. I'll also ask you a question in a second. So actually, Dishan, ask you a question.
Yeah, sorry about that.
Nice.
But I was just curious, like when I know you said tax equity is another thing, like it might take another session for you to explain that, but just curious, like at what time does tax equity investor come in during this process of project finance?
Okay, so your tax equity will need a few more sessions, but tax equity, basically, they are an investor that is investing for tax benefits. One example of tax benefits is there's some tax credits, particularly investment tax credit, which is worth about 30% of construction costs. Another one called a production tax credit, which is basically a credit you earn for the energy you sell. Another one called 45Q, which is a credit for sequestering carbon oxides. And they invest for those things, plus some other stuff. Typically, they invest at the very end of construction. So they invest the money at the very end of construction rather than throughout construction for lots of reasons. One being that they're a very strong position in the market and they can do that.
Okay. Yeah. And then are there any structures that like give seniority to tax equity over the lenders?
So tax equity is senior to the lenders.
Oh, it's always senior. Okay. How are lenders okay with that, or is that like just accepted?
It's the market. They've got to be if they want to be the market. Tax equity has the power.
Okay. And
sure.
that's
big question.
Sorry. Yeah, I mean, yeah, I was always curious, but is that similar to what back leveraging means, or?
So back leverage, again, hard to explain without the diagrams for the stuff, but back leverage basically just means, the lenders are subordinated or behind tax equity.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for answering.
Right. All good. Okay. So I want to talk through some risk, and just I'm going to come back to you and ask you a question in a second. So let's take an example of the risk item here under the power purchase agreement. And one thing that's kind of important to the person who's buying our energy is they want a very specific commercial operations date. Remember, commercial operations date is the beginning of operations. So under the PPA, the utility may request that the project is online by, say, January 1, 2022. And if it's not operational by January 1, 2022, the project may have to pay a penalty. Let's call that penalty $20,000 per day. And this is a cash penalty. A cash penalty is a very specific name called a liquidated damage. Liquidated damage, cash penalty. Why is the utility charging a penalty? Because they were depending on this power plant. They need the power. So how do we think the project company here mitigates this risk? If we think about that, we need to think who's the party that's best equipped to manage timely delivery of this project. Who is that party?
The
EPC contractor.
Exactly right. It's the EPC contractor. They do this every day. That's what they do. That's why they exist. They build these projects. So we want to pass on that risk to the EPC contract. Can you remember what that provision was called a few minutes ago? A fixed time provision?
Yeah, fixed time, fixed price.
Yeah, so fixed time was called date certain. There's a fancy name for it, date certain.
Yeah.
Now, would you, Deshaun, here, would you, if you knew the project had to be due or operational by 1 January 22, would you set your EPC contract to have to be finished by January 1, 2022, or would you set it to an earlier date?
Yeah, I'd probably do earlier.
Yeah, so one thing we need to do in project finance is allow flexibility. Okay, so it's, you know, I could have a contract that says you must finish the day before, but like I want to give myself some breathing room. And in fact, I may even pay, let's call it a bonus to the EPC contractor for finishing early if I really want to incentivize them. Assuming I can actually sell power early. If I can't sell power early, I'm not going to pay them a bonus for finishing early. I'm just going to sit on a project. But let's go back to this penalty of $20,000 a day. How do I've got this nice date certain project back. How do I deal with this $20,000 penalty that's going to come to me, the SPV? Is there something I can do to protect myself, the SPV here?
Maybe, so something to protect myself from this penalty, is that?
Yeah.
Just put it on the EPC.
Yeah, you can, the SPV will take the penalty they would have got from the off-taker, the person buying the energy, $20,000 a day, and that's the EPC contractor. Under this contract, you have a penalty per day if you're late. Will that be $20,000 though, or will it be some other amount, do you think?
But generally, just one question, but generally these penalties or liquidated damages does not fully cover at the receiver's end. It might happen that the EPC may compensate because there should be limitation of liability to the contract value what EPC has signed,
Okay,
and
so,
the end consumer might be charging more on that end.
Okay, so a couple of things to unpack on that's all fair. So number one, if I've got a penalty from the off-take of $20,000 a day, I'm going to charge more than $20,000 a day to the EPC contractor. Why? Well, I've probably got some other costs that I need to pay. I've probably got my operations and maintenance contractor started. I've got to pay them. The fact that the construction's late, they still want to get paid. I might have to pay the lenders back some money. I have to pay that. So I have to actually charge them a higher penalty to cover those costs. In addition, I don't want to get rich off liquidated damages, cash penalties. That's not the objective. Because if I went to the EPC contractor and said, I'm going to charge you $1 million a day, A, I probably can't even get a contractor to build it. And B, they're just going to quote me a stupidly high price and commit to a date that's 10 years in the future to finish it. Like, it's just not practical. So I want to charge them reasonable costs. No matter what, as Abhishek just sort of said, the limit of liability is probably equal to the amount of the total contract in the first place. So they'll also be capped. But that's the idea. We're trying to pass that risk across the party that's best able to take it. Talk about the O&M provider a little bit. Under the offtake agreement, the project company may be required to be available for a certain number of hours each year. If the project fails to be available for that period of time, the project company may be penalized and receive a penalty from the off-taker again. How do I deal with that? I pass that risk to the O&M contractor, pass them the same cash penalty or a little bit more, maybe to pay legal fees or whatever else. I'm just trying to pass the risk through. Mechanical failure, turbines. I'm going to ask GE to guarantee that they work. And if they don't work up to specifications, I'm going to charge them a penalty. So you can see I'm trying to de-risk this as best as I can by passing the penalty over to the parties who are best able to deal with it because they know how to fix it best. And I'm trying to get the risk off me, the project company. But that's kind of weird because something sort of doesn't feel right. If I'm an investor, I'm paid to take some sort of risk. I only get a return on an investment if I actually take risk. And it feels like all I'm doing here is taking the risk and just going, hey, someone else take it. And so the question sort of comes up, what risk is the project company actually taking? And just bear in mind, though, when you answer this question, project finance is a relatively low risk form of equity investment when you compare it to, say, venture capital, right? Something that's like, maybe it's going to be like 10 times money, maybe it's going to just be dead next year. It's not that sort of risk. So some sort of more modest return. But really, what do we think the biggest risks are here? And sort of maybe raise a hand if you want to answer the question. I'll pick one at a time. But what are the risks do you think in, say, a renewable energy project are things that maybe I can't contract away or that may happen? So maybe raise a hand and I'll pick people one at a time if you feel you have a risk here. Start with, sorry, is it Christian or Soren?
Soren. It's okay. I get it all the time. Yeah, I mean, first they've got to coordinate all of these different things. So something could break down in all of the different negotiations and contracts. Yeah,
and actually, one of the biggest roles, anyone who wants to get into project finance, one of the biggest roles you do here is look for gaps in the contracts. And here's a really kind of good example of one. Not too long ago, there was a wind project in the US whereby the turbine supplier had to deliver the turbines to site, which they did. They dropped the turbines to site. The EPC contractor, their job was to construct the turbines and put them on the foundations, the footings. Unfortunately, the contract was not specific about where the turbines had to be placed. The turbines couldn't just be dropped off at the front of the site. They had to be put down right beside each foundation because the EPC contractor, the one building it, in their contract, they thought, or they said, I want these turbines put down by my foundations because I do not have the equipment to move the turbines from the front of the site to my foundations. And it just sounds silly. Like it's such a, you think, in retrospect, that's dumb, but it's easy to make these mistakes. There's a lot of like detail and attention going, what exactly happens here to here? What are those gaps that may occur? And like, if you look at wind and solar now, a lot of those things are kind of ironed out. But to, I think it was Lona's question earlier, newer technologies, we're going to have all these sort of issues. So gaps in contracts is a really good example. Thank you. I think Cooper had raised a hand. Is that right?
Yeah, I was just going to mention the coordination thing, but another thing that comes up is depending on how the PPA is structured, you could be taking on certain economic risks if you don't appropriately build in hedges for things like inflation.
Yeah, so, you know, in the PPA, sometimes or quite often, they're a fixed price that escalates at a certain, based on a certain escalation profile. Like, let's call it CPI for argument's sake. If your O&M contract escalates at a different rate, and those two escalation factors change over time, you're going to have a mismatch in inflation, and that certainly can be a risk. But hopefully you can structure that right up front. What else? I think Deshaun, you raised your hand too.
Yeah, similar to the PPA point, I think the term of the contract, once it expires, how do you find a new one? And also, how do you make sure you get a pricing that works for everyone in terms of the offtake rates? Yeah.
So good point. I didn't even get into that detail. So clearly you've got a bit of experience in this, but the PPA contract often is not the full duration of the project. So there's like a period where we're forecasting after the PPA contract that is merchant. What I mean by merchant is we're forecasting that in the future we'll be selling at the prevailing energy price at the time. We may not. We may get an extension of the PPA, but I don't know what I'm doing in 10 years time, 15 years time. So it's a guess. Abhishek.
Yeah, I just want to mention this risk because of availability, like mostly for renewable. It might happen that what you have projected, the availability would not be that much because of whether not due to the fault of EPC or anything technical thing. And also like for major power plant fuel supply, it might happen you have all the things in place for your contract, but fuel may not be available, and they are mostly controlled by government. So those risks, and
Yeah,
it will
sorry.
Yeah, no, that's all, which is out of control of any parties involved in this thing.
Yeah, if you were buying like natural gas, for example, and there was another COVID and supply chains got disrupted, like there's some things that are just not in your control. Jake, we're missing a big one here.
Yeah, one risk that has kind of been hinted at is political risk. These projects have a very long duration in some cases, 10, 20, 30 years, and the political winds could shift rather dramatically. And that could be both a negative and a positive, because, I mean, in the sense that, the environment could be structured today such that companies make investment choices, and then 10 or 15 years later, there might be a much more positive decision on the government side to invest heavily in renewables. But these people who have invested previously and put their capital in are getting a much smaller rate of return than if they had waited. And that can be a problem as well as all the tax credits go away.
Yeah, so Jake, that's a great one. There's you can't contract for changing the tax law. By the way, O&M contractor, I'm going to pay you less if the tax laws change. You're going to go, no, go away, find someone else. And so you can't contract those things away. Political risk is a great one, particularly in emerging markets, but also in the US. Any change in the permits that I need, for example, like that happens, I can't do much about it. Søren, actually, one thing before you say, Søren. So, Jake, you talked about tenor, sort of duration. Things could change over time, 20 years in the future, for example. And that maybe leads you to one. Other one is contract failure or abrogation of contract. Right? I can have the world's most perfect EPC contract, the world's most perfect O&M contract, or the world's most perfect power purchase agreement, but they're not worth much if my counterparties don't honor those contracts. They go bankrupt. So I worked on a project in Australia as a prison years ago, where the EPC contractor brought the wrong doors, which is not ideal for a prison. And so the EPC contract actually went bust through that process. And did it cost us more money to find a new contractor? Yes, absolutely. You had to renegotiate other contracts as well. So there is abrogation or failure of contract. There's another really big one. Sorry.
Was it force majeure?
So force majeure, some of that you can insure for, but some you can't. Earthquake, for example, you might have something there, but that's another one. So active, so force majeure. So basically things outside of our control, anyone's control. Maybe one that we haven't got to yet. With the case of sun and wind, unfortunately, Mother Nature will not sign a contract with me. Unfortunately. If I had that power, I'd be a very rich person. But we don't have that power, so I don't know how much the sun's going to shine or the wind's going to blow. Okay, so there's a lot of risks that actually sit here, and the role of project finance people is to figure out all these gaps between contracts, the creditworthiness of these parties. Like, what's the risk if this party goes bankrupt? Can I sell energy to someone else? This party goes bankrupt, are they the only people in the world that can do this thing? If so, that's a problem, kind of back to the new technology point. So we're trying to de-risk things as much as possible. One thing I just want to kind of put in perspective briefly, and then I want to stop some questions. I want to cover back the question from Alona as well. And Søren, your hand's still up. You got another question? No, okay. One thing that kind of like just goes beyond how we think about this sometimes. So good questions, yeah. So one of the things that we kind of forget about sometimes is just the duration of these contracts. We're talking about renewable energy projects that go for 30 or 35 years. It's a long time. Like think back, just even the offtake contract, your PPA. You know, one example of this is what we call corporate PPAs, where we sell energy to a corporation. You know, if you went back 20 years ago to your parents and said, hey, I'm going to sign an energy contract with Kmart, they would have said, awesome. Kmart is going to be around forever. It's, you know, it's a strong business. Clearly, you would have been wrong. And so we kind of forget just how much the world changes and the duration of what we're actually modeling. There's not a single project, I mean, maybe some very short-term biomass things. You know, first time I was involved in renewable energy was 2003. None of those projects are even halfway, like they're kind of halfway through their lives. So you forget just how much the world is going to change and what we're modeling. We have to model these things out really carefully. Because one little mistake, instead of modeling out 30 years of cash flow, can make a really big difference. In fact, if these contracts aren't clear and someone can change terms that causes pain in the future, that's going to hurt me. So with EPC contracts that dictate my construction costs, I try and fix my PPA price as best as I can. And what's kind of interesting is when you look at the costs under your O&M contract, these projects typically have really high margins. What I mean by that is the revenue is much higher than the costs, much, much higher. So that looks great. But why? Because I'm investing a huge amount of money up front, hundreds of millions of dollars. And so here's an example of kind of like how this might look. And I've just made these things up. I've just said, look, let's say you've got 40% equity, 60% debt, and you're paying debt back over 15 years. What's important about this is quite often, and I'm going to show you cumulative equity cash flows from time equals zero across the years. Quite often, equity doesn't even get their money back until after debt's repaid. That could be 15 years, could be 20 years. So we're investing hundreds of millions of dollars, hundreds of billions of dollars in these things. We really want to try and de-risk them and be able to forecast things as well as we possibly can. And for this drives us into building really large and complicated financial models, which on its own, by the way, is its own risk, getting those right. But what we're trying to do is forecast cash flows, pass risk to the right parties, and we're going to forecast that somehow in some financial model. That's kind of what we're trying to do with project finance. Okay, so these models also get kind of complicated. And that's kind of right bang on an hour from when I started. I went a little bit quicker in some points than, because I know you've got a session in starting in 20 minutes. But I wanted to sort of touch on the question that Lona had. Where's Lona?
Hello.
Oh, okay, sorry. Got you. Sorry, my screen's moved down the very bottom. Okay, so your question was, does it make it difficult for emerging technologies to break into large development projects? Absolutely. It's very hard for things like batteries to get finance under project finance, although they are happening. Some project finance lenders will take more risk than I've just shown. They will actually take more risk. That was the perfect world of renewable energy. But there is projects whereby maybe only 20% of the energy is sold under a fixed price and the rest is sold to the market. Yes, lenders will finance those, but they'll put in a lot less money than if it was less risky. So batteries, for example, can be financed this way. And you can also do other things like get hedging for energy prices, for example, that might help you de-risk batteries, although people are still unsure about how batteries even work, what the revenue streams are in the sort of lending community. But let's say you go a step further, green hydrogen. That also becomes hard because lenders don't know what it is. They don't know what the risks are going to be. And so that's kind of challenging. And I'll come to how we might deal with that in a second, but just to go to the extreme end of project finance. The most sort of risky stuff that project finance lenders do is mining. And clearly we need a lot of mining now because batteries apparently don't grow on trees. Neither do turbines for that matter. And so we need lots of mining. That's the reality of it, although most renewable energy people don't like saying that. And so if you're, copper wiring we need. Copper, when you finance a mine, you don't know what's underground. You don't know what price you're going to sell it for. You can't get a certain price more than 3 years. So that's really risky, but project finance lenders will lend to it with detailing expertise. They're just going to lend a lot less money for those projects. So you can get funding from newer technologies. The issue with newer technologies is a little bit about debt, but also about just cost. So batteries are still kind of expensive. Green hydrogen is still very expensive. And so one of the ways they're probably going to be financed a lot coming up is through grant money from philanthropic capital. They're going to fill the gap, and even like subsidized debt by like people like Breakthrough Energy Catalyst, for example, or Microsoft or Amazon. A lot of those parties are lending like cheap debt, but also taking more risk and willing to lose money for those new technologies if they're going to result in less carbon going to the atmosphere. So you can do it, it's just a bit harder.
Well, thank you.
All right, Jake.
Yeah, kind of dovetailing with that line of conversation, as technologies like solar and wind mature, do you anticipate a shift from project financing to, say, utilities doing it all, in-house balance sheet financing, rather than setting up special project vehicles, special purpose, limited liability structures and getting investors, as sort of some of the technologies mature?
So there's a good question. It's actually not just a question of risk here. Sorry, of sort of what. So really, the starting point is what's the alternative? And kind of as you said, is maybe utility could own it themselves, but that's a very different risk. Just like forget how you finance it. Utilities owning power plants is a different risk to having an obligation just to pay for energy, because the utility, if they're paying for energy, they're not taking the risk of how that power plant works. They're not taking the risk of developing and finding those new power plants in the first place and where they're going to go. So there's a little bit of risk transfer here. So the idea of the independent power producers, the private ownership of these is as much about risk transfer as financing. So there's that element to it. The second is project finance structures offer a lot of risk protection themselves. This idea of non-recourse, a limited liability, is often deemed to be a good thing from any investor standpoint, including like a utility, because no one can come back to them specifically, only to that project vehicle if things go wrong. So it's a lot about risk. Where you see, and corporate finance is the other way, where like GE, for example, maybe a better position might be, well, what would GE do? Because GE doesn't need to use project finance. GE could use corporate finance because they'll probably get cheaper debt. Their credit rating is probably better than the project company. So they may use corporate finance. But project finance, one of the biggest benefits outside of risk is also, if I corporately finance, I'm GE, corporately finance a project, I'll probably raise like 30% of the capital, because that's, they're roughly about 30% debt or 40% debt, whatever GE has. I don't actually know. But project finance, you can raise like 70 or 80% of your capital. So you can do more projects with project finance. So there's more leverage. So part of it's about you put less equity in, part of it's about risk. And the third piece of it is really about cost of capital. Now, project finance, and maybe Jake, your question's coming from a bit of experience maybe, but like project finance takes a long time to originate and organize, because look at all these contracts. Look at all the time it takes and the consultants you have to pay. Jake, I'm not sure, I went a bit of a deviation. Just if I did not answer your question, let me know.
No, you did. I come from a background in oil and gas offshore, and so I'm not so familiar with the financing. I'm on the project management side, and so, but as far as has been visible to me, the companies offshore, because they're even though they're so bleedingly expensive, they finance it, on the corporate balance sheet or with a select partner or two, but they're not setting up these special purpose project vehicles. Now that may be different on the land side for oil and gas, with the fracking revolution and everything as well. But it's been interesting, as I explore a transition to renewables, to see that it is so heavy on the project financing, project development, separate entities doing all the work coordination wise, and then you have these long-term agreements, of course, with utilities to sell power, or and it varies depending on the geography, the political nature of the industry and everything. And so I'm just curious if as you know, if there's a technology element, or if it's, you know, as you mentioned, all the de-risking seems to be a big benefit as well.
So I would say, first of all, oil and gas, just if you're upstream on that, your risk is more than a renewable energy project, just face value of that. Then a bit of oil and gas financing. I think the difference in oil and gas to some degree is that a few parties who are very, very big have very, you know, own majority of things. Whereas the renewable energy world, there's lots of small stuff everywhere. There's lots of small players who themselves, they can't raise a corporate finance. There's just not enough of them out there. So they have to go and do project finance. And Pat, yeah, good. It's a fair point as well. Pat's put in chat. Other questions? Yeah, I mean, so I think, Pat, your point is like if GE starts to put all of their renewable energy projects on their corporate debt, it changes their overall risk profile as well. So it might raise their debt terms in general. You know, I've worked with a lot of pension funds around the world as well who just do everything in project finance. It's a de-risking mechanism, and what they like about project finance, Jake, as well, is that the amount of due diligence, the amount of parties trawling through everything is kind of high, and that means it's less risky. Pat, do you want to add something?
Yeah, kind of a different question. It was I guess more broadly as a career expo, people are interested in project finance from a career standpoint. How transferable are core project finance skills across technologies, or do you kind of tie yourself into a technology, you know, once you get started in a project finance career?
Very transferable. So I've done mining, oil and gas, infrastructure, renewable energy. Like I started feeling like myself as like a jack of a number of trades, but a master of none in a way, because you know what your skill is doing. Like if you want to work in this space, lots of financial modeling, lots of reading contracts, lots of structuring stuff, like figuring out how to like de-risk things. That's basically what it is. Now, what you rely on is technical experts. Like whilst I can explain a lot about how the energy grid works and the risks around it, well, I am an engineer, but like I wasn't an electrical engineer. I designed buildings back in the day. But like I'm not that expert on the technical side. What we do is we coordinate tax attorneys, we coordinate the lawyers, we coordinate the accountants, the technical teams. We kind of run the deal process, and we rely on the expertise of third parties. And so very, very transferable. You have to love numbers. You have to love contracts, and like it's kind of fun because you're creating something. But it also comes probably with sometimes pretty tough hours. Obviously, if you're on the deal side, but it's very, very transferable. And if you've got engineering backgrounds or legal backgrounds or science backgrounds, they're all, I'd say most people in project finance have a background of that somewhere along the lines. So is it Narelle?
Yes, thank you. I had a question about force majeure and all these COVID ripple effects that we're seeing. Projects that were maturing are supposed to be commissioning in the 2020, 2021 timeframe. Have you seen a lot of either penalties or penalties held back, or I guess what were some of the effects? Did everybody get a mulligan on some of these things? Any?
Mostly. I mean, I saw a lot of lawyers getting paid, and people claiming things like force majeure. Nothing I was involved in got, pretty much everything that I worked in just was renegotiations of stuff. Basically, there was gives and takes from different parties. Was COVID-19 specifically force majeure? It depended on the specifics. If you had, suddenly the ships couldn't move product of some kind, there was maybe arguments for it, but it's very specific, and it's probably a really good question for some lawyers in the space who would have seen more of it. I saw everyone trying to claim it, but largely people got mulligans, as you said, around the space.
Thanks.
I'm happy to be around, but I know there's another session coming up.
Yes, I'm getting told that we should try to wrap it up here. This has been a great session, though. A lot of awesome questions. So thank you everyone for asking those. I think we have about 10 minutes here before our third session on project development. A lot of overlap, I think, with some of the early parts of the section. We'll see how projects are developed before they can be financed. I again want to thank Hayden for coming and giving this presentation. If anyone is at all interested in Pivotal 180, happy to talk about actually taking the class. I cannot recommend it enough. And then Hayden, if you want to, yeah, exactly. I was gonna say, if you want to throw your email in the Slack there, or in the chat, people can reach out. But I think with that, we can let people go and grab some food, use the restroom, and we'll be back in 10 minutes.
Okay. Thanks, everyone. Feel free to reach out with any questions.
Thank you, Hayden. That was great.
That's all.
Malene, if you're still there, I think we can stop this recording and then start it up at the start of the.
Yeah, let me pause it now.
And how is and where is a project going to be built? So that those kind of questions is come to you. What is a project development looks like and who's running it? So then you will see a lot of different terms for the project development, project management, and sometimes project analysis. There's a lot of terms kind of referring about the project development process. And also for your job search, I believe that this is a lot of audience here. You're kind of looking for jobs and a career development here in the renewable energy sector. So you will see a lot of title like project manager, project developer, or development manager, and permitting manager, or power market analyst. So those kind of like a job titles, I will cover each phase of the project development, that what you can actually need for the skill set or function of those titles, and maybe what kind of knowledge is required for those kind of title and function. So those are I will cover. And for this purpose of this workshop, I don't know, maybe I cannot really go deep dive in, because I would like to introduce entire spectrum of project development instead of going deep diving. And then also we already did like project finance and policy and regulatory session before today's workshop. So if you have any more specific question and specific or any specific interest on those process or separate process, let us know and let me know. I mean, I can cover a little bit more with a question, but my intention for this workshop is walking you through what is a project development looks like. Maybe we can have some example, but I try to give you what will be the function for those phases. Moving to next page, the slide. So I was a little bit hesitant to like put this one like in an order. And this is a kind of like full spectrum of the solar project development. You may be familiar with all the terms or these phases, or maybe I only know finance, or I only know construction. But this is a kind of like a life cycle. I mean, it's the kind of full spectrum of project development. So, and then also I'd like to emphasize this. This is not only gonna happen in like a sequence, in an order. So even though I put like a site control and interconnection, permitting, power purchase, finance, EPC, and then operation, however, sometimes a lot of these phases process overlapped. And at the same time, you may have to revisit certain permitting at the construction. But the reason why, I will walk you through why, but this is another kind of like, it's more kind of like snapshot of the project development process. Here today, what we're gonna discuss about the project development, and probably I believe that storage project development as well, wind project development as well, hydropower, probably similar sequence like what I'm gonna present to you today. And then in the bottom, sorry, I have still in the bottom, like I kind of like divide as like kind of stage. So you may hear a lot like early stage project development or mid stage or later stage. And what is NTP, like NTP stage of the project. And of course, once you build the project, there will be operation phase. So those kind of like all the phase or the stage, what we gonna refer a lot like early stage, so-called greenfield, and maybe NTP ready projects. That means that project is a little bit mature, so it's ready to build. And then for me as a project developer, you can come in any time of the phase like this, because also depending on the company that you're working with or you're working for has only focused on greenfield. So that means this greenfield early stage, I kind of put a green color on it, what we kind of consider as early stage project. And the project with a site control interconnection, that means it was greenfield. A lot of my work for the M&A transaction, probably we will take the project a little bit mature, like NTP ready projects. So you will hear a lot of terms like this: greenfield, NTP ready project, so-called or shovel ready project, but this could be, they'll divide as like site control interconnection permitting. So like those kind of small steps as well.
Quick question, Stella, then for, I guess, a solar project, how long does it take to go through kind of this full spectrum of development? Does it vary with the size of the project?
That's correct. So it is, yes, that's true. Because of size of project, yes, that's correct. However, even though the small size project, the steps that I like kind of like spelled it out, like site control, interconnection, that is sometimes it's hard to gauge how long does it take. Sometimes permitting process in California, it minimum takes 2 years, 2.5 years, because we have a certain like a CQAP process. There are certain like kind of the process, the protocol that we need to follow. That means permitting take 2 years, minimum 2.5 years. But unlike California, Texas, permitting process relatively very short. But it will take a longer time for interconnection. So typical like over 15 meg projects with fully baked in project, I will say minimum 3 years and 4 years. But it is sometimes it's depending on each process and depending on region. So yeah, the project development itself is probably minimum 2 years of lead time, but always I feel like is really like take a longer than you expected. And also, I mean, I think just previous session that I had some question about COVID, the force measure. We are extending the project because of all the supply chains. So here in the finance, the EPC is constrained because of those kind of force measure thing. So they will delay the project for a long time. So it is difficult for you to give like, oh, this will take 2 years, this will take 3 years. But yes, that's why we are thinking about a lot of contingency, a lot of aspects of entire project's development phase. But yes, it's depending on the region, depending on the size of the project, depending on technology. That was a good question, because that was the first thing. Like that's why maybe probably a lot of developers, I guess that one of the skills that you may need to have is being a patient. So yeah, project development requires a lot of patience, I would say. Okay, if you don't have any question more than this, we can move to each phase of the project development. So we can start from site control. Yes, by the way, there's all the photo in this slide is developed by Adapter. pretty much everything is done by my current company. So I think I have authorized to use all the photos. So this is like, I believe this is on Oregon. So let me make sure, but I will also introduce some other project if I have more time to introduce that. But yes, site control. So even though I say like all the development process or the phases is not in order, but first thing you need to do is secure the land. And of course, this is like utility. So another thing also I will discuss, or I will like walk you through about solar project development and focus on utility scale. So I believe residential and CNI, they are a little different and they have a different phases as well. So focus on utility scale project development. First thing, you need a property, you need a land, piece of land that you can build your actual projects. Of course, there are some like floating PV, or you may not even like with land, you may just like build your project surface of the water, which is, I did it before, it was very fun. So I don't need a land, but still there are a lot of permitting process. So on the other, well, we can cover sometime later about that. But site control. So first thing you need to do is finding a land. So this right side of like all this desktop survey and site selection, title works, land lease, purchase negotiation, those kind of like big function is what you are going to do when you say site control. So I can go over a little bit more detail and explain. This is going to be your day-to-day function. If you are doing a site control, your first task for the project development is going to be site control. Yes, you will start from the desktop survey. So I remember my first responsibility of the job as a project developer, and I remember that I was working with Google Earth, or there's another GIS tool that desktop survey. Where should I build a project? Is there any good land? So there are a lot of like information you will laid over on this GIS tool, but still is this desktop survey. You may not go to the site at the first time, but still you're gonna do your own due diligence on desktop survey to finding a good land. And then also you can run the data flow analysis or interconnection radius studies, as well as that will kind of link to all other aspects of interconnection and permitting anything. So this desktop survey is the first step for you to find a site. And once you find a site, and you may reach out to landowners, because all the land, it has owners. It could be public, it could be private health ownership. So it sounds very interesting, because I used to do as like my first job as developer, I used to do a lot of cold call, just calling the landowners, just random. I just interest myself, and sometimes, a lot of like, because of this, like land is pretty much all the agriculture. So I have to deal with a lot of farmers and explain what is this. And sometimes when I say, oh, this is for a solar project, will you lease your property? Will you sell your property for a solar project? And when I say solar project, some of landowners, they don't know what it is. I would say, oh, okay, so I would like to build a farm with a solar panel, and then they still don't know what it is. So it is a lot of like kind of requires like kind of relationship management for the landowners, and then like outreach and community outreach and landowner outreach. So this kind of work is very basic work for the project development. So once you find a site, once you have engagement with the landowners, that's very first step for the site control. And then once you figured out what the property looks like, and then you will go to more detail on the like digging up more information about the site. So those third one that I put in the title works. There are a lot of time we ignore or neglect this type of work because it may be not really required. Like seems like, oh, title doesn't really relate to solar project. However, since the solar project is going to be built on the land, there are a lot of title works, and sometimes this title works can kill the project as well. So it's very important works as well. So you will do some title due diligence with the legal team or like a on local consultant, and then you will also work with outside or in-house legal team or whoever and title creative work. And also another like work is important work for title work is going to be mineral ownership. So also this is work is depending on the location of the project. So for example, I had a project in Texas. Relatively Texas project is very simple permitting process. However, as you know, there's a lot of mineral ownership on the project, on the site. So that requires a lot of engagement with mineral owners so that we need to consent that we can build a project. So there's a lot of things related to the title works. And also I put easement and crossing, which is we are getting all the interested parties or owners of adjacent neighbors, whoever they own the property next to your site, we will need to get the consent. It could be private, it could be public. So this work is very complicated, but at the same time, and it's kind of be the first work for you to build the projects. And then once you're clear a lot of works, and then yes, you may have to have a contract with the owners of land property to get into the negotiation with the landowners to get the lease, either purchase agreement. So those kind of work that will be called the secure the site or control the site. That's going to be the first process of the project development. You have any question on the site control? I guess this is a pretty detailed, but of course there's a lot of beyond of work. And then also, of course, specific role for this site control. And then when you like looking for a job, you will see some like site selection, site acquisition. That's going to be function that you will find as a project developer's responsibilities. Or there's some specific title like a real estate person or real estate manager for this type of work. Okay, and then moving to interconnections. This process is particularly very unique. Unlike other process, this might be required a specific skill set like electrical engineering. Once you secure the land, and then next will be the secured interconnection queue. So most of the interconnection application or the secure the interconnection queue, you have to prove that you have a site. So that's a kind of like maybe site control first, and then once you have a site control is done, you will get into the interconnection process. So as I say, like this particular process and the phase require a little bit of more technical inputs on this. So because it's an interconnection. So if you understand about interconnection, how it works, first, what you need to do is this project is built somewhere. If this project or sync or how to get in the transmission line, that's going to be the first thing that you will figure it out. That's what we call the grid injection study. So this is kind of preliminary work prior to you submitting the interconnection application. So here I say like pre-application assessment and the feasibility studies, which means how far this project from substation, how far it's going to be from the transmission line that you may or you may not build your own transmission line, because this is going to be related to cost, the build cost. So it's very important, and a lot of project could be suffer from this transmission cost, and we call it interconnection cost. So getting the estimate on how much is going to be interconnected to certain transmission line, that will be the very, very important, and that will be very important factor for the economics as well. So once you have some grid injection study, so you found a land very close to the substation or transmission line that, well, this will work, but still you are not building your own transmission line. You are kind of interconnecting somewhere is owned by transmission owner, which is going to be utility. So let's say PG&E on their own like transmission line, SCE, LADWP. I'm talking about California because pretty much I guess not everyone, but most of people here it's going to be California. So if you are familiar with PG&E, SCE, all the transmission line is owned by utilities. So you are submitting the application to those kind of utility transmission owners. And then that will take, is really like depending on the process, depending on the size. So under 20 meg, you may have only 8 months of the process. We call the fast track. But if you're over 20 meg, they will be getting to the cluster study, and there's a longer process to get into the study. And then this is also transmission level. So that's why it has a phase, or it have a different system impact studies. There's a lot of studies, but this is not running by you. It's going to be run by the utility, the transmission owner. So that's why you apply your interconnection queue. Once they are done, all the studies, and then you will figure out how much it's going to cost for the interconnection build and how much it's going to cost for interconnected certain transmission line. So this will be more kind of, still you're going to be, as a project developer, you're staying in this process as well. But as I say, this particular process requires a lot of electrical engineering design and more work, so that you may have in-house interconnection manager or team entire support this process, or you will hire outsource for interconnection injection or interconnection application support from outside consultants. So for example, we use most of the work for interconnection, we use outside of consultant, because most of them, they're from utility or they're from CAISO. So they have a better understanding about what will be the transmission looks like. So this work, and once you're done with grid injection study, interconnection application, then it will take another like 2 years, like 3 years. But once you're done with this, all the work, you're gonna get into interconnection agreement. So the interconnection agreement. Sorry, I think my dog is still. Okay, I was just gonna keep going then. So interconnection agreement, this is one big part of the contract you are gonna get into. So having the interconnection agreement is gonna be first step that you're gonna have a big agreement right after lease agreement too. So you will see a lot of project development is related to the contract management too. So this is a very important. And then once you have a generation interconnection negotiation, which means you're gonna negotiate with all the cost of the build out, network upgrade, and even timeline for that. So that's another, like, maybe it will take another like 6 months, 8 months of the process of negotiation of the interconnection agreement. And then once you have interconnection, once you get into the negotiation, of course, there might be a lot of questions from transmission owner, like some question about the studies, because each grid, each generator, which is a project, can impact their reliability of transmission or their capacity of the transmission. So there's a lot of back and forth with the transmission owners as a generator and developer to make sure that is anything is required for the transmission, because transmission owners, their purpose of this, all the agreement is make sure that this generator, they're building or ramping up their transmission line for the project if required to do it. If not, they just need to control the reliability of transmission and also the process of the transmission. So this is a quite important process, I would say. And as you know, we see a lot of, and also this is, the interconnection is not just for the solar project, it's all power generator have to interconnect. So this is the most important part of project development. I cannot emphasize more than that. So really important process. And that's what I'm saying, like maybe you have in-house for the interconnection, could be outsourced like consultant for this type of the process. Do you have any question on the interconnection part? Maybe I think my dog was gonna interrupt a lot of portion of my explanation, but if you have any questions, just let me know right now. I can go over again.
I have a quick question. So I'm wondering, how is the interconnection process like standardized for solar projects across like geographies or even just across technologies? Does it really differ?
Good question. So I would say yes, and I would say no, but pretty much I would say yes, because we have a tariff. So if you go in the PG&E or the CAISO, it also controlled by FERC, which is the federal. So all transmission also controlled by state, or they're on a state-owned utilities, and also on like your controlled by federal. So you can take a look at the FERC tariff, and each PG&E also has their own tariff, which is a state level. And then it's all like even regional like utilities, and which is like a transmission utilities and transmission owners, they have their own tariff. So pretty much it's going to be step by step following the protocol. However, there might be some room for the new technology like the storage. Still, they're kind of building up on their own tariff for the storage, because it's like a new technology too. I guess some other wind might have a different tariff as well. So I'm just speak for the solar project and the solar project interconnection. And yes, pretty much. But there's some room for you to kind of change some of the requirements, and also you can work with the utility transmission owner for the timeline. But pretty much all the process is like standardized and then controlled by their own tariff. That was a good question. And also, yeah, and then maybe I can cover about the geographic, like a location. So I guess, as I was saying, like there are certain kind of like ARCA, CAISO, PJM, and a WAC, and then everywhere, every like ISO, and then a different market has their own tariff. So it should be just depending on the region, and then who will be the transmission owners. I think I have some question from someone else. Yes.
Hi, yes, this is Neural. My question is, for solar projects, is there less, do you find less, I guess, resistance or more ease because there's not fuel pipelines and maybe the environmental footprint is lower than, say, a natural gas plant?
Well, I cannot really compare to the national gas plant because, well, I guess because this is renewable, it says different. I would say so, but pretty much all the interconnection perspective is I believe that they are following the same tariff and same protocol though.
What happens in case of like interstate, like 2-3 states, and then your consumer is that this process goes for like each transmission utility, or that the point of connection?
Good question. Yeah, I mean, so that point of interconnection, that's correct. However, it doesn't really only for the point of interconnection, because some of the project, even though we have a POI, but the actual selling the power, which is how you inject your power energy into the grid, yes, you got to go in the point of interconnection, but however, you may have to, for the power sales, like selling the power doesn't mean to be on a POI or bus bar, it could be just hub. So this getting the interconnection is to make sure that your power generation, your energy is getting to the grid. And then later on, that's more kind of like depending on how you're going to sell your power. It could be hub or you could be bus bar. Is that satisfy your question or?
Okay.
Yeah, we can always visit certain part, and I will move to permitting. Yes, permitting is very critical. I think each phases I will say, oh, this is important, but yes, permitting is is also very important, because you will be surprised sometimes permitting process, it costs a lot. Sometimes this can kill the project as well. I think I say there's something about for site control or interconnection can kill the project. Yeah, each process can kill the project. Hold on a second. Let me work on my duct. As long as he's on my lap, he's not gonna bark. So permitting process. Yes, here I emphasize here, the permitting requirements is very going to be a significant impact on the cost and development time. The reason why I say cost and time, because you will be surprised how much it's going to cost for mitigate the risk of the environment impact on that, as well as some other like permits, some other permits they require for that. So I can walk you over the permitting process here. So first, let's think about the timeline. I think even though I I'm going over with order, site control, interconnection, then permitting, no, it's not. Actually permitting, once you have site control, when you have a designated property that you're going to build a project, probably as soon as you secure the land, you're going to kick off the permitting process. There's one reason, because the permitting process will relatively take longer than any other process. And also this is going to be a little bit out of your control because you're dealing with a lot of different interests, like county and state, and also federal, and also local neighbors of that project. So there will be a lot of interest parties kind of involve this permitting process, so that it might be, or it might not, it might be, or it might not be your control. So that's why it's better to kick off permitting process as soon as possible. And then also, this is also depending on the size of the project and in the depending on the region. So even each county has a different process. So it is very complicated and also very important, and then it's related to the how you are managing the risk of this project, because you will find a lot of risk on the permitting process, and that's why it's very important. So let's say, like, so first what you can do, at least same thing like what you're doing at site control, you will do some of a desktop survey. So once you have a designated area of the property, you will run the data flow analysis, so-called a desktop survey as well. And then you will probably have preliminary design. So what you see a lot of like Alta survey here is I put the more detailed land parcels map. So all the parcels map, and you can see that, oh, this is related to like how I can access these projects and what is going to be required for this project. And another thing about the zoning. So pretty much like utility scale solar projects is going to build on agriculture zoning, or it could be maybe relatively small and then also really kind of close to the city, could be commercial, but it's going to be very expensive. But that's why I thought, like, let me say that maybe it's going to be agriculture parcel and property they're converting to the this energy. So you may have to like go to the county, hey, we're changing the zoning. So zoning ordinance, and then there are a lot of like related to local, they prove that this can be a solar project property. So that will be one of the process that you would go through. And then another survey, like a preliminary survey for the permitting, you may have to you have to conduct cultural historical survey, biological assessment, and also you're going to run the floodplain. You're better, like, that's the first thing that what you're going to do for the desktop survey. So those are, I normally go with more kind of environmental engineering firm. And if you're a company where you have some support from in-house, they would call the permitting manager. So they were gonna like have a more insight and understanding of each region. So could be very regional specific, or it could be very like detailed for this person is gonna be charged for the only biological assessment, or it could be only going to focus on some other thing, is not just beyond the biological thing. So those are the preliminary surveys for the permitting process. So with all the studies have in your hands, and then you can kick off some environment permitting process, or you can go ministerial permit, which is this ministerial permit is for the construction. So probably you may not need it at the moment that you're running the process of the permitting phases. But as I said, like, though permitting means, it just not mean the local thing. It could be federal, it could be state, it could be county. And then also once you're done with that, that each step, this is a public process. So you may have a lot of like hearings, and then you may have some reached out from the community in the local. So that's why it sometimes is delaying the project as well, because you got to deal with a lot of like complaints, and you got to maybe you cannot really move forward because you found the total out of like 1,000 acres, and then you may have to stop the project process. You might have to run the survey to satisfy all the environmental, the government entity to kick off the process again. Any question on the permitting side? So I got one question from Jake. How much the cost and complexity of the permitting one? Good question. So yes, it is really depending on the county and depending on the state. So let's say, for example, in the California project, you may hear a lot of CEQA, like California Environment Quality of is Authority, I believe. So that's a CEQA process. So you have to kick off the CEQA process. First, you gotta work with the county to kick off that process. It is more state level of getting an environment permit. Is complexity is yes, and then depending on also the finding of the land. So if you found any endangered species, that would be very complicated. Of course, it doesn't mean that that's going to kill the project, but you may have to go through the mitigation part, which is that will cost a lot. So, and then also that's why maybe you have heard like an intake permit and a credit, like a nutrition credit or something like. So you found like one endangered species on your site before the construction. It doesn't mean that you cannot build a project, but still you got to follow some protocol so that you are working with the authority to make sure that survey or certain years of survey, and they say, okay, this one just like kind of temporary, they're nesting here or they're just living here. But, or they are gonna probably suggest any remedy, like you're buying a credit from the credit bank to take them to restore their habitat to somewhere. But that costs tremendous, a lot. Yes, so like if you're gonna build a 10 million project or 20 million project, sometimes this kind of intake the permit or the getting the credit, that could be 40 million. Yeah, it happened, but it's very rare, but still, when a project, I love turtles, I love all the like species. Yeah, I sometimes I hate to see them because when we do like site visit, hopefully I can see any turtles or any like lizard, any frog, but you know, that's like kind of like you're following the environment protocol, which is we gotta like follow that. Otherwise, you know, you will see a lot of yeah, that's the nonsense. So that's why you need to go through this process, and then yeah, complexity and the cost really depending on the region and then the government as well. And moving to power purchase. So this is going to be, so I think once we cover like site control, interconnection, and maybe we already kick off the process of the permitting, we call the, greenfield is pretty much done. And what do you need? That's another big thing, that once you have a project and you're gonna generate the power, what are you gonna do? You need to sell the power. So I think that's why I think you cover a lot for this power purchase. I believe that project finance part, because this is a revenue. This is going to be a revenue stream for the project. So this is a very important, because this is PPA, the power purchase agreement or power purchase and sales, going to drive economics of the projects. So many of the development shops, which is I used to work, they treat this power purchase and sales almost separate process. they have a separate team for this. They have a separate department for this. So, and another thing, you may start your own career as maybe power market analysis. So my team, we have juniors, his title is like power market analyst. So what he's doing is, my coworker, what he's doing as a title, as a power market analyst, they're doing short-term, here I say like short-term, long-term market and price projections about the power price. And then also there's a power purchase, means there are some of the rate you will see. So it could be $27, $34, maybe lowest as a $21. That will be the revenue of the project and revenue of the power. So that will be the function for the power market department and power market person. They're tracking or they're analyzing the trend of the power price. So that will be the first thing that you will do as a power market analyst, those running those kind of trend and power, what will be the good, feasible or more profitable area that you can build, you can have the power purchase, so that maybe you can start from there. So even though that's what I say, like, oh, this is in order, maybe it could be backward. So you are running this power market analysis first. Then certain region has a better PPA price, better power price. You will definitely go there, and then site selection start. So that's why, even though I say, oh, this is in order, but it doesn't always have to go that order. So for example, how the company, the project developer shop, how it functions, maybe we do power market analysis, in interconnection injection study, site selection at the same time. So, and then you figured out which region is going to be good for projects. For example, like California PPA price is really not great for a developer because it's low, because it's like a lot of renewable energy. Even though a lot of off-taker, which is a power take, we call it off-taker, they have a mandate, they have to reach a certain renewable energy. Still, there are so many solar projects in California. So the PPA price is so competitive. But maybe if you go to MISO or some other region or TVA, you will have a better PPA price. So like $37 versus $21, which market you want to go? I want to develop more project in the PJM because it has a better revenue. So those kind of thing is not in order. That's why you maybe start from those all the power market analysis and the injection studies as well. So that's why just keep in mind, it's not always in order, but this is like function for you are going to do as a project development process. And then, so once you are done with the power market, and then what you're going to do is there's a lot of different ways that you can get the contract. So I will divide as a contract power, uncontracted power. So here's a PPA. That means you have a contract power. So first, you're going to prepare the proposal for the solicitation, and then who's going to be off-taker? Off-taker means you are they're the power buyer, and I'm the power, like I'm selling the power. So who's a buyer for the power? Traditionally, off-taker means used to be utility. The PG&E was off-taker, and SCE, Sun Edison, and ARCA, they are the utility, they are the off-taker. And munis, like a small city or the other city, LA, Los Angeles city, they are the off-taker. But I would say last decade, we see a lot of corporate PPA. I think we cover a lot in the project finance session too. Corporate PPA means Google, Salesforce, Facebook. Not only just they are buying a physical energy, but sometimes they trade the power. So for example, Lululemon is one of the off-taker too, because they have some mandate or their goal for the renewable energy, or they're like RPS thing. But even though you don't have RPS, but there's a Fortune 100, like the 500 company, Fortune 100 company, they have their own set of sustainability responsibility. So they want to procure the power from the hub, but it should be the renewable energy. So we call the corporate PPA, sometimes we call the virtual PPA. And this work is gonna be a long process of negotiation for the power purchase price. Is really a lot of very defined terms for all the different things. Like it's gonna be energy price, it's gonna be capacity price, it's another revenue for ancillary services prices as well. So there's a lot of revenue we call the one power purchase price, but not only power purchase price doesn't mean that's only energy price, because there's a lot of different other like revenues, like REC is another thing. REC prices are different too. So this is gonna cover for the contract power. And then there's another way that you can sell the power. It's gonna be merchant. I think I want to emphasize this merchant market, because unlike before, the PPA, which means a contract. So contract means next 10 years, next 20 years, you have a very set revenue, which means I think the previous project finance, like maybe year 15, you have all the cash out, our return is going to be all done. However, now the PPA period is getting shorter and shorter, because you, as an off-taker, they want to like anchor the one number for the 20 years. And also like electric market or price is like fluctuating a lot. That's why the PPA getting shorter and shorter. So now you can see only 5 years or even like 10 years, and they're getting on kind of standard right now. It used to be 25 years. That means you have a steady 25 years of revenue versus right now, you may have only 10 years contract set revenue. So that means, what are you going to do after a contract is done? Either you can find another off-taker to get contract, or you can sell the power to merchant market, which is going to be a little bit more competitive. However, there's a lot of upside too as well. So this is a whole different market for how you are selling the power. So this type of like process could be treated as a separate, the project development, because it could be trading as well. It's more kind of related to power market. So that's why I'm saying that it could be separate process. However, still is conventional, a very typical way of a project development. This is a big part of that, whether this project has revenue or not. So this is one of the important process as well. Any question on power purchase? If not, we can move to second. By the way, how's the time for this one? Because I think we started a little bit late.
Yeah, I think we can go over a few minutes, so we're good on time.
Yeah, pretty much all done, because I think the heavy lifting thing for the project development is pretty much like once you have a power purchase agreement, yes, now what we need to do is build the project. So probably I will cover some of the later stage, which call like mature project, or the project itself right now is leaning to NTP. So let's move to financing and legal.
Stella, just one question on PPA.
Mm-hmm.
You mentioned like this PPA, like in terms of like timeline, it comes after those the first two which you sold. And generally, like many countries, or like when these things are happening, like PPA happens to be the very first process. Like when you have offtake guarantee, then you start all those processes. Yeah.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's what I'm saying. Like, it's not going to be in order. It could be all parallel thing. But however, in order to get the PPA, those three precedent process that I mentioned, site control, interconnection, permitting, typical way of RP for solicitation for the power purchase, they require those 3 steps. So you got to prove that. You got to show them you secure the land, you have interconnection queue, your permitting has kicked off. Otherwise, yeah, I mean, I have not seen any other solicitation RFP is now require those 3 process steps.
Okay.
Yeah, probably. Yeah, I mean, that's why the timeline is important, but you know, it's a hard sometime. It may be very difficult to gauge how long does it take to get interconnection process going to be done, and especially in permitting. That's why you will have some room for you to actually get the COD, which is like completion. But once you have a negotiation with the off-taker, the counterparty for the power purchase agreement, you also have to prove that how long does it take to get this project is ready to build. So power purchase agreement should be done before the construction, of course. However, you can still build a project without the contract. Then you will go to the merchant market, which is I see a lot of project is right now going to merchant market, because even though it's competitive, but you will see a lot of upside instead of having the very low PPA. So there's a lot of aspect like pro and cons for the contract on versus uncontracted power. But now I see a lot of even hybrid and like hatching for 4 years on a contract, and then you're hatching to like some other trading as well. But that's why I think it is like typical, it's a conventional structure that I maybe go through like this process, but now I'm seeing all different thing as well. And then, and as I mentioned about the power price, and especially that's one thing that I want to emphasize about the storage that change a big picture of this conventional solar project development and power purchase, because actually the putting the battery on your existing or the future for the solar project, that change all the revenue stream as well. And then offtake, so now most of offtakes also require some of the battery option as well. They also get some of the ancillary service and our local RA, which is attribute. Like, so they also require a certain portion of the extra revenue, extra technology, which is storage, to give them a reliability of the energy or capacity deliverables. I hope that answered your question. Well, we can discuss a little bit more on the later, because I think pretty much I am done with the process, but I would definitely want to touch upon the later stage of the project development as well. So let's move to financing and legal. So I'm not going to touch a lot on the project finance, and I'm not a project finance person. So it was very good to hear from previous session, and I was the one actually take the Pivotal 180 courses. Really, I recommend if you are interested in project development, they give a lot of good overview on what project finance is, not only just finance, they will cover a lot of, they will cover also like risk management as well as like economics as well. So it's very, I strongly recommend, and I'm a big fan of Pivotal 180 as well. So I good to see that session too. And yeah, product finance I think covers, so I don't think that I will cover a lot, but this is another important part. And also I believe this is kind of treated as a separate process. However, I want to put the finance and legal at the same thing, because also here the legal, yes, legal is important, because as I go over this project development, how many agreements, you heard that, because all the project development is how you're dealing with all the transaction documents, how you're dealing with a legal agreement, because interconnection agreement, lease purchase agreement, and yeah, I guess permitting also, there's some of the consents and then the process, and power purchase agreement, and here's a lot of legal. And as I'm an M&A person, when we are buying a project, is all about the legal contracts with the counterparties, like initial developers. So legal is a very important part of the project development, and the legal is going to be support entire process of the project development. So here the due diligence of the projects, and of course land use, real estate, and M&A function. I just mentioned about M&A function, and all the contract drafting and review. And yeah, there will be some dispute with maybe landowners, could be a counterparty for the previous developer for when you're buying a project. Could be, I don't see a lot of dispute with off-taker, but still. Like, for example, I think there's one question before about the force majeure thing. how impact on PPA? Yes, there's some resolution. The legal team is gonna hands-on on those kind of like a negotiation, as well as like giving us some remedy for the litigation for the legal aspects as well. So my day-to-day work as a project developer, I really, really, really closely work with the finance team and the legal team. It's like, I'm a project developer. I'm in a project development and business development department with a separate animal. No, I guess like pretty much we like very like interdepartment function that we have to work all the time together, and we support each other all the time. So financing and legal, I will say it's gonna treat it as separate, but with the project development process is just support entire process. And now we are ready to build a project. So hopefully you have a site, you have interconnection, your permitting is almost done, and your permitting is done, and you got the project finance, that you have a capital to build a project. And construction is another kind of like different process that I can cover separately, and then there will be another like session for EPC. So I don't know, I may not the right person to go over the construction, but as far as we are the project developer, we are engaging with EPC, like engineering, procurement, construction company. Could be the developer is themselves, they could be EPC too. So Adapter, my company, we are also EPC. So we perform the construction as well. We develop the project. We also perform the engineering and construction, and we also operate. So there's a call like EPC company, they do develop the project, or they could be just pure developer once they develop the project from the greenfield later stage. And when the project is ready to NTP with notice of proceed, maybe you will sell the project, or the construction company take over the project, or permanent owner came for the construction. So construction is very complicated and an important part, and then it requires a lot of, which is you're putting all the cash, your equity for the construction, which is that's your build. So this is a build out, how much is going to build out for the project. So there's a lot of aspect on the construction. I can just quickly go over what is required for the construction, and what you will see as a project developer, what will be the process that you will go through with the EPC. So of course, design is going to be more kind of more detailed design system, as well as site design as well. And then there will be definitely the engineering part. Like, yes, you will see a lot of civils and mechanical, and there's a lot of electrical engineering is required. There's another part is, I didn't put it here, but it's going to be procurement. So the procurement is a big part and then really important part of the construction and the EPC, because that also driven the economics of the projects. The module price, racking system price, storage price, and also another thing is deliverable time and on any other constraints for the equipment. Then another thing is important for the understanding of project development, and this is related to ITC as well. So this tax credit also, like how much you're going to procure for the safe harbor module, safe harbor equipment. So this construction, not only the construction is covered just like actual the project, but this is kind of starting from all the procuring the equipment. That's like how you're dealing with the suppliers, how you're dealing with the timeline. And once you have all the contracts done, it really like a heavy work with the EPC to go over the EPC contract, as well as make sure how they perform that. So one thing that I put here, the project management. So when you are here a lot of, oh, I am a project manager, they could be a different terms for project manager in the solar project development. Here the project management is they're gonna maybe in the hands-on the project development, which is in the construction phase. But when you say project manager in the development phase, like you cover overview of the entire process, like what I did. So there's like, depending on the organization, they call sometime project manager just for the construction part. Like my title right now, business development manager, which cover the entire process. So that little different terms, but it's depending on the organization. So it might be a little confusing, but that's why, because some of the company or organization, they more focus on the construction. They will say, oh, this is a project management work. So you will see some difference depending on where you are heading to. So there's a function of a project management here, and there's another important part is completion. So once you complete the project, it doesn't mean that like, oh, I'm done and I'm going to hand out. It's not like that, because you have to perform certain amount of generation, which is that really linked to your revenue stream, that you're definitely make sure that you're generating the power as promised for the contract, or you can generate as much as you want, but make sure that you're not hurting the transmission line. You're working on with an interconnection agreement so that you have a certain amount of generation that you have to build. If you cannot build, yeah, you will have some of the issue with underperformance or under guarantee, so that will cause some issues. So completion part is very important. So sometimes when you are a developer, if you are early stage developer, you may not see this process, or maybe you may not stay until completion. But this is another part that's very important for the project development, because once you need to at completion, you can make sure that performance and the warranty and the guarantee that all the meet that as required by contract or as the revenue or economics of the project. So this part is pretty important for the project development, and that will be the last stage for the project development. Any question? I guess, yeah, the construction part is pretty a big, broad kind of section for the project development. It could be treated as a separate process, but I want to touch upon, because my first two company, we were the early stage developer, so I never stayed in construction. So for my understanding as a project developer was pretty limited, because I was only staged in the early stage. So I never seen a construction, because most of the project I built or I developed, we sell at NTP. But since I was in the EPC company, we're more kind of like IPP, which is we're doing operation as well. I was able to see an entire spectrum of the project development, including the construction. They change a lot of aspects, because construction, it could be very risky, but that's a big part of how you're managing this. That's why construction, because of the construction, you may have to go back the first stage of the site selection. You may have to go to interconnection. So this is another big part of that, the project development, that you may have to pay attention. Or if you have experience, and I'll strongly encourage to go see an overview on the construction phase as well, even though you are in the early stage developer, because a lot of risk factor, it had to vet it in the construction phase as well. And moving to the last part of the project development. Once you're complete, yes, project is not going to be developed anymore, but still there's a big part of operation. So I didn't really gonna touch a lot on the operation side, and depending on the organization, maybe if the organization that you are you're working for, maybe they don't operate the projects, operate the assets, but operation, which is typical project lifespan is 35 years. So yes, you will stay as the company IPP is going to stay in the project for next 35 years. There will be O&M agreement, and there will be asset management agreement. There's a lot of function or a lot of another process. So I will stop here for the project development, and then there will be different process for the operation. So just understanding this operation is also part of the project development. But once the project is built, they will be leaning toward the operation and asset management side. So then it pretty much is going to be a very much in the cycle of the project. And so the one of the project I reached to operation, I don't really involve those kind of work, because our asset management team is running the project, so that not much of my support is required for the project running it, but still you may have to stay until the project is stable. You may have to still have some engagement with the off-taker, but this will part of like separate process for the operation process. And moving to the final one. So I think even though I walk you through in an order, but as I keep mentioning to you that project development is not a one clean cut. Once it's done, move to next. It's pretty much all on parallel stage, and it's just like all blended out, and then very overlapped, a lot of phases, a lot of processes overlapped. So site control, finance, construction, management, purchase, permitting, interconnection. So this kind of like slide, I want to like emphasize like everything working together so that you can build a project, make sure that you can complete the project correctly, then running properly. So in order to run the project properly, yes, this all the aspects, I will say all that kind of phase is to be done at the same time, but at the like right time. But I would say like it's all related. So that's my kind of emphasis. I would like to emphasize, because this is not just one clean cut, oh, you were gonna stay here. You may as a job function, but entire project development is very interlinked and overlapped in parallel. So that's what I want to emphasize of the project development. So good to know that entire project process, if you have a good snapshot of, oh, what will be the solar project development looks like. Yeah, I mean, with this basic knowledge, yeah, you will see, oh, that will be in order. However, it just keep in mind, it will be all the independent work at the same time, it will be all collaborating work as well. And I guess this is my final slide for the this workshop. I would like to have some more questions if I didn't cover a lot.
Yeah, thank you, Stella. I think we have time for maybe 1 or 2 questions from the audience. If anyone has any questions, then we'll head to closing remarks.
Well, while we're waiting for the more question, or I can just, if you, I want to move to, Melina, can you go to the next slide? I just want to introduce a little bit more. No, I mean, go back to the, not final, yes, my information. Yeah, so if you have any question about project development, and also if you're looking for a new opportunity and get into this solar project development industry in the scene, contact me through my LinkedIn, or this is my work email. Also, we are hiring each process as well. So for example, like we are hiring interconnection manager, we are hiring power market analysis. So, but it doesn't mean that, oh, because I don't have any experience that maybe I can go there, but still understanding this entire spectrum of the project development, maybe you can start from there. But I ended up doing project development. I used to be I used to do a lot of permitting, and then moving to different company, I was in charge of power market and not like power market marketing person. So I go out there finding PPA. That was my main job for 4 years before, and now I'm doing M&A. So always like kind of good to have the entire experience of the project development. It was always plus. And so I strongly encourage you to, yes, yeah, maybe I'm only interested in this part. Maybe I don't have any experience for the project development, but there's a job there. Oh, they're asking project development experience. However, if you have one kind of like a process that you already in there, that should be good enough for you to knock in there, hey, I have experience, this is a part of process, but I understand full spectrum project development. That will be support the one process. That's pretty good enough. So I don't want you to discourage by title, or if you have a specific maybe skill set, like electrical engineer, yeah, maybe you can start from interconnection manager, or you're helping the application for interconnection. But still, you can do a lot of work for the construction as well, and you can do a power market as well, because this is related to power prices as well. If you have a strong background on finance, yeah, you can be a project finance as well, but you can be a power marketing person to analyze what will be the power price. Or if you are more enthusiastic about, or if you're a very patient person, or you're good at cold call, you can be a site control manager too. So I guess that's why I think is, for me, I was lucky enough that I have a good experience for each status. Maybe I would say, am I expert on a certain thing? Well, project manager doesn't have to be expert on a certain thing, but good enough that I can run, and at least I can find and talk to expertise, which is or outside consultant, that what's going to happen for this project. I need your help. I need your support on this. So I hope that this slide or this workshop help you to understand solar project development. Is going to be just very snapshot. I can go detail. I guess each process going to be 1 day of worth of the workshop, which is, I don't think that's going to be too much. I don't even go through that. But yeah, I mean, if you want to know more detail on the project development, as far as I know, I could definitely talk to you in person. Yeah, I mean, reach out to me. And if you have any question about job searching, which is I did in like last time, the part 1, giving you some tips or how you can start. Maybe if you a little bit of know more about the project development before your interview or whoever. Well, I mean, just reach out to me. I will be happy to talk to you and give you some of like my experience. I mean, I guess that's the beauty of this organization, because I haven't been a YPE since 2012 from LA, and then I had a good insight from who were in a YPE. They gave me a good information about, oh yeah, that was back in like almost like 10 years ago. That's a long time ago. And like 8 years ago, they talk about storage. That was a YPE, the first organization that I heard about storage in this solar project development. I was like, what it is. And that time was EV. It was like, is it gonna really happen in like 10 years? It happened right now. So you will have a lot of good information, and don't hesitate to contact me or organization to get more ideas and more information. I hope that this is helpful for you and your career path.
Thank you, Stella.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank
Stella.
you so much, Stella. If anyone has a question, maybe we can do one question. Otherwise, straight to closing remarks. I know we're a bit over time, so thank you guys for sticking through with us. We really appreciate it. Thank you so much, Stella, for being here, both part 1 and part 2. You're a great mentor and friend. Thank you so much. Also, thank you so much to the attendees. I've seen a lot of familiar faces who joined us on both part 1 and part 2. So it's really exciting to have your support. Please be on the lookout. We'll follow up with an email probably in the next week. We're trying to get you guys recordings for both part 1 and part 2 of the event. We'll share kind of the contact info for the panelists, the workshop leads, all of the resources that were mentioned during the sessions. So be on the lookout for that. As well, a huge thank you to my co-planning leads. So Govinda, Pat, Igor, thank you so much for your support driving these 2 events. And then I want to make just a quick plug for our careers page. There's a lot of activity in clean energy right now. So Govinda, if you wouldn't mind, would you paste that in the chat? And yeah, we're planning more events for 2022. So we hope to see you guys again in the new year. Be on the lookout for some of the events that we're starting to plan, probably for January and February. We often host, we've hosted some virtual fireside chats. We're starting to host more in-person networking meetings, happy hours. We've hosted like industry specific panels. So just be on the lookout for that for 2022. And thank you again for everyone for showing up on a Saturday. We really appreciate it, and we're excited to hopefully see you again at our next events in 2022. Thank you.